I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. The words come up like a song stuck in your head, but softer, heavier. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. In the shower, when the water's too hot and you're staring at the same tile. Lying in bed at night, phone screen dim, scrolling past other people's lives, other people being chosen, and that sentence just appears again. You feel it before you even finish the thought. The tightness in your chest, that slow drop in your stomach. Your jaw clenching a little as another scene starts playing. That conversation in the car. The text you sent too fast. The moment you stayed silent when you wish you had spoken. The hardest part is how real those replays feel. How your body reacts like it's happening right now, even though it's already gone. Sometimes it hits you out of nowhere. You're making coffee, you're answering an email, and suddenly you're back in that room, hearing your own voice, watching yourself say the thing you wish you could take back, or fail to say the thing you wish you had been brave enough to admit. What scares me most is how one memory can pull your whole day under. You start believing that if you had just been different, loved better, been less wrong, everything would have turned out fine. And it's not just about one breakup, or that friendship that faded, or the family argument that still stings. It's not just about the job you didn't go for, or the person you didn't fight for, or the apology you never got. It's this pattern of turning every ending into evidence that you failed some secret test. That if you're alone now, it must be because you didn't know how to hold on. A lot of people live here, quietly. They go to work, they laugh at the right moments, they say they're over it, and then at night, in the silence, they lie awake replaying the same 3 scenes over and over. Psychologists call it rewriting the past, but to you it just feels like grief in disguise. There's nothing wrong with wanting to understand what happened. That doesn't make you weak. It just means you cared, and losing what you loved hurt you more than you can explain out loud. This isn't going to be about forcing yourself to move on, or pretending it didn't matter. We're not here to erase your history. We're here to understand why your mind keeps dragging you back, why it thinks that blaming you is a kind of protection, and how to slowly loosen that grip without pretending you never made mistakes. By the end of this, I want you to see your past differently, to notice how your brain edits the story, how it invents a perfect version of you who never existed, and then punishes you for not being them. We're going to talk about how to grieve that imaginary self you wish you had been, while learning to sit with who you are now without hating them. Because as long as you haven't given up on love, there is still hope for you. The problem might not be that you did everything wrong. It might be that your brain is telling you a very convincing, very incomplete story about what really happened. And we're finally going to start looking at the parts it keeps leaving out. When your brain turns the past into a movie. When something ends, your brain doesn't just remember it. It starts directing it. You lie there at night, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly the past turns into a movie you can't pause. You start cutting scenes, replaying the same 3 arguments, zooming in on the moment their face changed, adding invisible dramatic music to the exact second you said the thing you now believe ruined everything. It doesn't feel like imagination. It feels like evidence. But memory isn't a camera. It's a script you keep rewriting. You don't remember through the eyes of who you were back then, distracted and hopeful, and just trying to love someone. You remember through the eyes of who you are now, hurt, lonely, and desperate to find the one scene that explains why you ended up alone again. It's not just about what happened. It's about what you've decided it means about you. So after rejection or loss, your brain starts searching the footage for proof that you were the problem. It highlights every moment you were anxious, every time you needed reassurance, every time you raised your voice or went quiet. It fades out the nights you stayed up listening to them, the times you forgave what hurt you, the ways they pulled away or stopped choosing you long before the final scene. The hardest part is, the edit feels honest because the guilt feels real. Think about a simple disagreement you once had. At the time, it felt like a normal rough patch. You were tired, they were stressed, you both said things you didn't fully mean. You went to bed a little off, but still believing there would be another morning to fix it. Now, in your head, that same moment has become the night I ruined everything. One sentence becomes the turning point. One silence becomes the proof that you were never enough. Psychologists have a name for this: mentally rewriting the past with endless if-only scenes. If only I hadn't said that. If only I had been calmer. If only I had loved them better. You start building what I call the illusion of the perfect past. A version where if you had just done the right thing, been the right person, love would have stayed, and everything would have turned out beautifully. That doesn't make you dramatic. It just means you're grieving the version of your life you thought you could have had. What scares me most is how true this illusion feels. The shame is real. The longing is real. The ache in your chest when you remember their voice in the silence is real. But what if the past you're punishing yourself for never actually existed the way you remember it? Why we rewrite the story to make it our fault? Never actually existed the way you remember it? Because if you let yourself admit that, you also have to admit something even heavier. Sometimes things end for reasons you can't see, fix, or fully understand. Sometimes love slips through your fingers even when you were trying your best to hold it gently. And the hardest part is, there isn't always a clear lesson. No obvious rule you can write down and follow next time. That's the part that keeps you up at night, staring into the dark, listening to the silence where their voice used to be. What scares me most is not just losing someone, but realizing I could do everything right and still end up alone. That no matter how kind you are, people can still leave. No matter how safe you try to be, accidents can still happen. No matter how much you love, things can still fall apart. So your brain does something very human, very understandable. It rewrites the story to make it your fault. Not because you enjoy hurting yourself, but because it feels less terrifying to believe I ruined it than to sit with I might never know exactly why this happened. If you were the problem, then at least there's a map. At least there's something you can fix. You start thinking, if I hadn't said that one sentence, they'd still be here. You replay that one night, that one argument, that one moment you were tired or distant or scared, and you turn it into the single cause of everything that followed. It's not just about the words you said, it's about needing a clean line between cause and effect, because chaos is so much harder to live with than guilt. In a strange way, self-blame becomes a coping mechanism. If it was my fault, then maybe I can prevent it next time. Maybe if I punish myself enough now, I'll remember better later. Maybe if I never forgive myself for this, I'll finally become the version of me who never gets left again. That doesn't make you broken. It just means you're trying to feel safe in the only way you were taught. There's nothing wrong with wanting to understand what went wrong. There's nothing wrong with taking honest responsibility for the ways you hurt someone. But when every memory turns into proof that you are the problem, that's not accountability. That's survival mode. That's your brain trying to create order out of chaos, trying to turn heartbreak into a solvable equation so you don't feel so helpless. And as long as you haven't seen this clearly, it's easy to hate yourself for still looping the past. But if self-blame is your mind's way of protecting you, then maybe you don't have to hate yourself for doing it. Maybe the next step isn't to erase that part of you, but to learn a different way to feel safe than constantly putting yourself on trial. Survivor's guilt in relationships. There's a name for this thing you do at night, when you lie in the silence and replay everything you said and didn't say until your chest hurts. Psychologists call it counterfactual thinking, but in real life, it feels simpler and heavier. Survivor's guilt. Not in the dramatic movie sense, but in the quiet relationship way. The feeling that, because you're the one left standing, you must be the one who did something wrong. In a breakup, or a friendship that slowly went cold, or a family bond that snapped without a clear ending, you're the one still carrying the story. They're gone. You're here. So you start thinking that means you're also the one carrying all the blame. Being alone doesn't hurt the most. Feeling like the last witness to something you should have saved does. Survivor's guilt in love sounds like this. If I had loved them better. If I had noticed sooner. If I had been less needy, more open, less emotional, more patient. You walk through the same scene over and over at 2 a.m., convinced that if you had just changed one sentence in one conversation, the whole ending would be different. It's not just about missing them. It's about missing the version of you that you wish you had been. The hardest part is your brain doesn't show you a balanced movie. Because of how we're wired, the pain scenes are brighter, louder, closer. Every red flag you missed, every moment you were tired or distracted, every time you snapped or shut down, gets turned into proof that you failed them. You don't remember that you were exhausted from work, or scared, or trying your best with what you knew. You just remember that you were wrong. So you start rewriting the entire relationship as a list of your mistakes. You edit out their choices, their limitations, their unspoken struggles. You forget the times they pulled away first, the nights they chose silence, the ways they also didn't show up. It becomes easier to believe I ruined it than to sit with, maybe it was never fully in my control. What scares me most is how convincing that rewritten story can feel when you're already lonely. But feeling responsible for everything is not the same as actually being responsible for everything. There's nothing wrong with wanting to take accountability, to grow, to love better next time. That doesn't make you broken or dramatic, just means you care. The work now is learning to tell the difference between honest accountability and self-punishment disguised as honesty. And if you were really as powerful as you think you were, if you truly controlled every outcome, would you have let yourself get hurt this badly too? The hidden comfort in blaming yourself. Maybe that's the strangest part. If you were truly that powerful, if you could control every outcome, you would have chosen not to be this hurt. And yet, in the middle of the night, you still lie there, blaming yourself like it was all in your hands. It feels awful, but it also feels familiar, doesn't it? You know the script by heart. The scene starts the same way every night. The room goes quiet, the silence gets heavy, and you start pressing play on the same memories. The same words you said, the same moment they pulled away. It's not just about what happened anymore. It's about the ritual of telling yourself, if I had just been different, I'd still be loved. The hardest part is self-blame hurts and comforts you at the same time. It stings, but it's predictable. You always know who the villain is. You. And that gives you a clear solution. Be better, be quieter. Be less needy, be less you. That feels safer than sitting with the truth that some things end for reasons you will never fully see. What scares me most isn't that you blame yourself. It's that somewhere deep down, you might rather believe you ruined it than accept that love can slip away, even when you're trying your best. Because if it was your fault, there's a single moment to fix. A perfect sentence you could have said. A version of you that could have saved it. That fantasy hurts, but it gives you hope that next time you can prevent this. So you turn it into a ritual. Lying awake at night, replaying scenes like a director who never calls cut. You edit your words, soften your tone. Imagine yourself walking away sooner or staying a little longer. You build entire timelines in your head where you did everything right, and they finally chose you fully. Grief experts call this counterfactual thinking, but for you, it's just survival. You can't change what happened, so you rewrite it in your mind. And under all of that is an illusion of control. If you can find the exact moment you ruined it, you can promise yourself you'll never ruin anything again. As long as you haven't found that one mistake, you keep digging. You keep turning yourself into the problem to avoid the terror that maybe there was no clean solution at all. But there's a cost. When you make yourself the villain of every story, you stop seeing your own humanity. your limits, your context, your attempts to love with what you had. You forget that there's nothing wrong with being a person who didn't know then what you know now. That doesn't make you unworthy. It just means you are learning. So what if the goal isn't to find the moment you ruined everything, but to understand the person you were when you did the best you could with what you knew? When accountability turns into self-punishment. So what if the goal isn't to find the moment you ruined everything, but to understand the person you were when you did the best you could with what you knew? That question is where accountability is supposed to start. Not with a verdict, with curiosity, with who was I then, instead of how could I be so wrong? Because wanting to take responsibility isn't the problem. You care. You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to become the kind of person who walks through love leaving bruises and calling it just how I am. In a strange way, your self-blame is proof that you have empathy. You're trying to make sense of the hurt instead of pretending it didn't happen. There's nothing wrong with that. Healthy accountability looks quiet from the outside. It's you sitting with the truth that, yes, you snapped in that argument, or you ignored the red flags, or you stayed when your body felt lonely, but your chest felt tight. You name what you did. You let yourself feel the sting without turning it into a story that you are the sting. You apologize where you can. You ask, what can I learn? And you actually let the answer change how you show up next time. The hardest part is rumination can feel exactly like that from the inside. You stay up at night replaying the same 3 sentences, the way their face changed, the moment they went quiet. You imagine 1,000 alternate scenes where you were calmer, cooler, more secure, as if one perfect line could have saved everything. It feels like work. It feels like you're fixing something. But you're not moving. You're circling. Psychologists call it rewriting the past, but you mostly know it as, if only I'd been better, they would have stayed. That's not accountability anymore. That's self-punishment dressed up as growth. You're not asking, what was happening for me? You're asking, what's wrong with me? You don't feel more honest after you think about it. You feel smaller, more hopeless, more convinced that you're dangerous to love. There are signs you've crossed the line. You start believing you were the only reason it ended, even though you know, somewhere under the noise, that 2 people built that relationship, and 2 people carried their own wounds into it. You start using the memory as proof that you're unlovable, instead of information about what you want to do differently. Your thoughts don't move toward action or repair. They collapse back into the same conclusion. I ruin everything. What scares me most is how noble that can feel. As long as you haven't forgiven yourself, it feels like you're still paying the price, like you're keeping the hurt sacred. But accountability leads forward. It turns into boundaries, different choices, softer words, clearer no's. Self-punishment keeps you frozen in the scene that already ended. Unable to love better now because you're still trying to bleed for what's gone. You don't have to stop caring about what you did. You just have to stop confusing hurting yourself with healing. The past doesn't need more of your pain. The present needs more of your presence. So the question becomes, if you stop punishing yourself tonight, what kind of love could you practice tomorrow? The illusion of the perfect you, who could have saved it. If you stop punishing yourself tomorrow, you might notice something strange tonight. You're not just grieving them. You're grieving the version of you that you wish had shown up instead. The one you meet in the dark when the house is quiet and the silence gets loud. In your head, they're so clear. There's a version of you who never shuts down, never freezes, never says the thing that lands wrong. They always know what to say. They never get triggered, never overreact, never miss a sign. They read every micro-expression, catch every shift in tone, respond with perfect calm. They hold love like it's easy, like they were born knowing how not to hurt anyone. After something ends, you start building this person in detail. You replay the same conversation at night, and you watch them take your place. In the car, in the kitchen, in bed, you see that better you pause instead of snap, ask a question instead of assuming, walk away instead of begging, stay instead of running. The hardest part is how reasonable they seem, like they weren't a fantasy at all, just one different sentence, one extra breath, one more bit of self-control away. What scares me most is how convincing that feels. Like there was a narrow doorway where the real you stood, overwhelmed and tired and scared. And right behind you was this flawless twin who could have saved everything if you had just stepped aside. So you torture yourself with comparisons, not because you enjoy the hurt, but because believing you ruined it feels safer than accepting how much was never in your control. In every alternate timeline you write, they're the hero. In every if only, it's that version of you who notices the red flag early, who sets the boundary kindly, who doesn't stay for the second betrayal. Or they're the one who somehow loves them so well they never leave, never lie, never shut down. They keep everyone safe. They rescue the relationship. They make sure you're never alone. But here's the quiet truth. That perfect you never had your history, your exhaustion, your blind spots, your fear of being unchosen. They weren't carrying your childhood, your past breakups, your lack of information. They had the script, you didn't. They knew how it would end, so of course they knew what to do. You were just a person trying to feel your way through a story you'd never lived before. So it's not just about forgiving what you did. It's about grieving who you didn't get to be. The self who never made mistakes, never froze, never said something they wish they could take back. There's nothing wrong with longing for that version. That doesn't make you ungrateful or dramatic. It just means you're human, and as long as you haven't gone numb, you will wish you had loved better. Part of healing is letting that imaginary self die, gently, so there's room for the real you to breathe. If you stop chasing the version of you who never existed, who might you finally be allowed to become? How your nervous system was there the whole time. When you stop chasing that imaginary self, you're left with the moments you actually lived. The night you snapped when you wanted to stay calm. The conversation where you went quiet when you wanted to be brave. The date where you smiled and said, "It's fine," when every part of you was screaming that it wasn't. Those are the scenes that visit you in the silence, aren't they? You lie awake at night replaying them, convinced that if you had just said one different sentence, love would still be here. Not because you like to torture yourself, but because it feels safer to believe you were in control. The hardest part is, you're judging yourself now with a steady heartbeat for what you did then with a nervous system that was on fire. We talk about those moments like they were simple choices. Why didn't I just speak up? Why didn't I just walk away? Why did I overreact? But it's not just about willpower or morals. So often, what you call failure was your nervous system doing what it learned to do to keep you safe. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Think about the time you snapped. The words came out sharp, louder than you meant, and you watched their face fall. You tell yourself you were cruel, but maybe your body heard a tone, a pause, a look that sounded like old hurt, and it went into fight before your mind could catch up. That doesn't make you a monster. It just means your body remembered danger faster than you could remember love. Or the opposite. You went still. They asked what you were feeling, and you said, "I don't know," even though you did. You weren't cold because you didn't care. You were frozen because your body remembered what happened last time you spoke up. Silence wasn't apathy, it was freeze. Sometimes you became extra pleasing, overly understanding, shrinking your needs so they wouldn't leave. That wasn't you being fake, that was fawn. A survival pattern that says, if I stay small and easy, maybe I won't be abandoned again. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be loved. What scares me most is how quickly you start calling your survival being pathetic. When your body senses threat, real, or remembered. It can hijack your words, your clarity, your ability to stay present, even with someone you love. As long as you haven't learned how to calm that flood, it will choose safety over honesty every time. So maybe instead of, "I failed them," you try, "My nervous system panicked, and I didn't yet have the tools to soothe it." If your body was doing the best it could with what it knew, maybe the story isn't "I ruined everything," but "I was overwhelmed and I needed help I didn't know how to ask for." And if that's true, the question becomes, what would it look like to learn a different way now? The stories you inherited about love and blame. What would it look like to learn a different way now? Sometimes, to even imagine that, you have to walk back to where you first learned the old way. Not in a blaming your parents kind of way, but in a quiet, late-night kind of curiosity. What did love look like in the home you came from, in the culture you were raised in your first relationships when you were still trying to understand what being chosen meant? Maybe love looked like keeping the peace, voices rising, doors closing a little too hard, and you, as a child, learning how to make yourself small so the storm would pass faster. Maybe love looked like being helpful, being easy, never asking for too much. Not because anyone said, "You only deserve love if you're perfect," but because that is what the room rewarded. The silence after you fixed things felt safer than the chaos when you didn't. The hardest part is, our bodies remember those rules even when our minds forget where they came from. You grow up and it's not just about your childhood anymore, but the script is still running underneath. Be understanding. Be mature. Be the one who doesn't make a fuss. There's nothing wrong with being kind and steady. But if love was something you earned by being undemanding, how could you not blame yourself the moment someone leaves? What scares me most is how quickly we turn childhood survival strategies into adult self-accusations, without ever noticing the bridge between them. If you grew up walking on eggshells, you start believing every crack you hear now is your fault. If you were praised for being so mature for your age, or the peacemaker, you start feeling responsible for everyone's emotions, even when you're the one who's hurt. So when a relationship ends, those old stories wake up. They whisper in the background when things go wrong. You should have fixed it. You should have known better. If they're upset, you failed. You replay conversations at night, not because you enjoy suffering, but because counterfactual thinking gives you the illusion of control. If you can find the one sentence you said wrong, then maybe you can believe the loss was preventable. But you didn't wake up one day and decide, "I'm going to blame myself for everything." It just means you were trained, in subtle and not so subtle ways, to carry more than your share. To confuse hyper-responsibility with love. To think that as long as you haven't fixed it yet, you're not allowed to rest. If these stories were taught to you, they are not your fault. And if they were taught to you, then they can also be unlearned. You are not doomed to repeat them forever. The next part is gently asking, if love isn't something you earn by suffering, what could it look like instead? Why letting yourself off the hook feels so dangerous? If love isn't something you earn by suffering, then this is where it gets scary, isn't it? Because underneath all the replaying and all the "I should have known better," there's this quiet belief you almost never say out loud. If I stop being this hard on myself, I'll stop being a good person. I'll hurt people. I'll repeat the same mistakes. The hardest part is, your self-criticism doesn't feel like cruelty. It feels like protection. It feels like the only thin wall between you and the version of yourself you're most afraid of being. The careless one. The selfish one. The one who walks away and sleeps fine at night, while someone else lies awake in the silence, feeling small and wrong and alone. So you keep yourself on a leash, not a visible one, but a moral one. Guilt as a collar, shame as proof that you care. You tell yourself, if it still hurts, that means I'm not a monster. If I'm still replaying the night it ended, the words I said, the text I didn't send, then maybe I'm still safe from becoming the kind of person who doesn't look back at all. It's not just about what happened. It's about who you're terrified of becoming. But what scares me most when I listen to people like you is how convinced you are that cruelty towards yourself is the engine of your kindness. As if the only reason you're gentle with others is because you're brutal with yourself. That doesn't make you noble, it just means somewhere along the way, you learned to trade your own softness for everyone else's comfort. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be accountable, to feel the weight of your impact. But your empathy, your values, your awareness were there long before you started punishing yourself for every imperfect moment. You loved before you blamed. You noticed before you obsessed. The part of you that winces when you remember their face. The part that hates the idea of having hurt someone you loved. That part doesn't disappear the second you offer yourself compassion. It just stops bleeding long enough to think clearly. Self-compassion is not saying, it didn't matter. It's saying, it mattered and I'm still worthy of learning and growing from it. Can you feel the difference? One erases the hurt to escape the guilt. The other keeps the truth of what happened, but lets go of the belief that you must be endlessly punished to prove you care. Imagine a friend sitting across from you, eyes red, telling you they messed up the way you did. They raised their voice, they shut down. They stayed when they should have left, or left when they should have stayed. Would you trust them more if they were vicious with themselves forever? If they called themselves names, starved their own hope, convinced themselves they were unlovable? Or would you trust them more if they were honest? If they said, I was wrong, I hurt them, I wish I had done better, and I'm going to learn how, and then actually changed how they showed up next time? When you picture the kind of person you feel safe loving, is it the one who is always bleeding, or the one who is always growing? As long as you haven't forgiven yourself, you think you're being careful. But what if the part of you that's terrified of becoming careless is exactly the part that will keep you from ever being that person? The difference between regret and self-erasure. What if that part of you that refuses to forget is not your enemy, but your conscience, trying to speak a different language than the one you're used to? Not a language of punishment, but of alignment. Because regret, real regret, is not proof that you are broken. It's proof that you care. Regret is what you feel when your actions and your values didn't line up in a moment. You raised your voice when you believe in gentleness. You pulled away when you actually want to stay. You agreed to something your body felt was wrong. That sting afterward is your inner compass saying, this isn't who I want to be. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means you have a standard for the kind of love you want to give and receive. But then there's something else that creeps in, and this is where it gets dangerous. Regret says, I did something I'm not proud of. Self-erasure says, because I did that, I am unlovable. Regret is about a moment. Self-erasure is when you take one night, one season, one version of you who was lonely and scared, and you start using it as proof that you are fundamentally wrong. What scares me most is how fast the slide is. 1 second, it's, I wish I had done that differently. And before you even notice, it has turned into, I am the kind of person who always ruins everything. Do you hear the difference? One is about behavior. The other is a verdict on your entire identity. One leaves room for change, the other locks the door. So we practice different words. Not, I am a terrible partner, but I acted in ways I don't want to repeat. Not, I'm unlovable, but I behaved in ways that didn't reflect how much I care. That doesn't make you a liar. It makes you honest in both directions. Honest about the hurt you caused, and honest about the love that still lives in you. Because regret can be a doorway. It can move you toward repair, apology, different choices, gentler nights. Self-erasure slams that door shut and convinces you you're not worth trying again, not worth being chosen, not worth the effort of growth. And as long as you haven't completely given yourself over to that voice, there is still hope. Think of a house. You wouldn't burn down the entire house because one room was messy or even wrecked. You would grieve the damage, clean, rebuild, repaint. Yet you're willing to burn down your whole sense of self over one painful chapter. It's not just about what happened, it's about what you decide it means about you. You are allowed to hold both truths at once. I wish I had done better, and I am still worthy of love and another chance to try. The hardest part is believing that the second sentence gets to stay true, even while you work on the first. But that's where we're going next. Learning how to live with what you regret without disappearing inside it. Learning to grieve the version of you that never existed. Living with regret means you keep meeting this other version of you in the dark. The one who would have said the right thing, seen the warning signs, loved so flawlessly that nothing ever had to break. Do you feel them standing behind every memory, quietly correcting you, whispering, "If I had been there instead, we'd still be okay"? You see them in that one argument you keep replaying. In your mind, they stay calm while you shut down. They listen instead of freeze. They walk away the first time they feel disrespected, instead of giving one more chance, and one more after that. Being alone doesn't hurt the most. Being haunted by the person you think you should have been does. Psychologists call it rewriting the past, but you just call it 2 a.m. You lie awake at night, running all the if-only scenes. If only I had answered that message differently. If only I had loved them better. If only I had loved myself more. The hardest part is you start to believe this perfect you was real, and that the real you ruined everything. But that version of you never existed. They are built with all the answers you only have now, after you've been hurt. They know every red flag because you've already bled on them. They speak up with a confidence you only grew after being ignored. It's not just about regret, it's grief. Quiet, complicated grief for a self who only ever lived in hindsight. You're not just mourning the relationship or the opportunity you lost. You're mourning the person you wish you had been inside it. The one who would have walked away sooner. The one who would have stayed and tried harder. The one who somehow did both at the same time and never felt lonely or wrong. So I want to try something with you. Close your eyes if you can. Picture that idealized self standing in front of you. Maybe they look like you on your best day, a little brighter around the edges, almost shimmering. Notice how impossible they are. Notice how heavy it feels to keep chasing them. What scares me most is how easily we confuse them with reality. But they were stitched together from pain, not from truth. There's nothing wrong with wanting to grow, to love better, to choose differently next time. That doesn't make you broken, it just means you care. If you want, you can write them a letter. Thank them for what they represented. Safety, control, redemption. A promise that love would never leave again if you could just become them. And then, gently, tell them you're tired. Tell them you're learning to live without their constant criticism. As long as you haven't gone numb, you can grieve them. You start to let them go. And when you stop chasing the person you think you should have been, you make space to finally meet the person you actually are. Meeting the you who was there all along. So if you're not chasing the fantasy version of you anymore, who's left? Who's actually sitting there in the silence of that night when everything fell apart? I want you to picture them, not the edited memory, the real you, the one who hadn't slept properly in weeks, the one who kept checking their phone, trying to say the right thing, trying not to say the wrong thing, the one whose chest hurt every time their name lit up the screen, because love and fear lived in the same notification. You weren't just a set of mistakes. You were tired. You were hopeful. You were confused. You were carrying every old wound that whispered, if this ends, it means you were never chosen. The hardest part is your brain doesn't replay that context. It just replays the moments you wish you could edit. Think about how you showed up, even when you were scared. The texts you sent to check if they got home safe. The apology you typed and retyped because you didn't want to hurt them again. The way you tried to listen better after that big argument. It's not just about the times you raised your voice or shut down. It's also the times you stayed, even when you felt lonely, right next to them. What scares me most is how rarely we look at that past self with the same softness we offer to people we love. If a friend told you, "I did my best with what I knew then, and I still lost them," would you call them pathetic? Or would you see their shaking hands, their red eyes, and think, "Of course you're hurting. Of course you tried." So what if, instead of asking, "Why were you like that?" you asked, "What were you afraid of? What did you not know yet? What were you missing that you needed?" Safety, reassurance, the belief that there's nothing wrong with wanting to be held, even if it made you cling tighter than you wish you had. This isn't about excusing everything. You're not pretending you didn't cause hurt. You're remembering that the person who caused it was also in pain. That doesn't make you the villain or the hero. It just means you were human, trying to survive something your nervous system read as danger. If it helps, imagine this. You, right now, sitting on a bench next to the you from the day it all ended. Their face is swollen from crying. Their phone is in their hand, screen dark. What would you want to say, knowing what you know now? Not to fix it, just to witness it. You start by seeing them clearly. Because the more you can see the you who was there, not the perfect one, not the monster, but the human, the easier it becomes to choose differently next time, without hating who you were last time. And that's where real change begins to feel possible, instead of like a punishment. Why? Your brain keeps bringing it back up. And yet, even when you see that past version of you more clearly, the memory still comes back, doesn't it? You catch yourself thinking, "I've already gone over this 1,000 times. Why am I still here? Why am I still in that room, saying those words, watching them leave?" You're not broken for doing that. There's nothing wrong with your mind for circling the same scene. Your brain is not trying to torture you. It's trying to protect you. It repeats what feels unfinished or dangerous, like a detective going back over the same blurry footage, hoping that if it just zooms in one more time, it will find the exact thing that keeps you safe next time. The hardest part is, your mind really believes this will work. It believes that if you replay the conversation one more time, you'll finally land on the perfect sentence that would have made them stay. It believes that if you keep scanning your mistakes, you'll earn a guarantee against ever feeling this hurt again. Not because you hate yourself, but because being the one who was wrong feels easier than accepting how little control you had. So you start living in if only. If only I'd answered differently. If only I hadn't been so quiet. If only I hadn't loved so much. Psychologists call it rewriting the past, but for you it just feels like lying awake at night, heart racing, rehearsing a life that never happened. It's not just about the person you lost. It's about the version of you that you wish could walk back into that memory and do it right. Underneath all of this is a loop, a habit your mind has learned. Something triggers it. A song from that summer, a street you walked together, their name popping up in the silence of your own thoughts. Then comes the routine. You replay the memory, you pick apart every word, you blame yourself for not being better, calmer, less needy, more lovable. And then, even though it hurts, there is a reward. A tiny moment where you feel in control, where you feel certain you know what went wrong. That doesn't make you weak. It just means your brain is choosing safety over truth. It isn't quietly asking, "Is this fair to me?" It's urgently asking, "Does this help me believe I can prevent this in the future?" The more emotionally charged the memory is, the louder it becomes, so its persistence doesn't mean it's more true. It usually just means it touched something deep in you. What scares me most is how easy it is to think this is your personality, or your fate, when it's really just a pattern your mind practiced. As long as you haven't seen it as a loop, it feels like a moral failure instead of a learned response. But if your brain can learn to loop on self-blame, it can also learn a different way to respond when the past knocks on the door. And that's what we're going to teach it to do next. You don't have to choose between blame and denial. If your brain can learn a loop, it can also learn a path. But the hardest part is this. Most of us think there are only two paths to choose from. Either you blame yourself for everything, or you decide nothing was your fault at all. Either you live as the villain of the story, or you erase the story completely. Do you feel that tug of war inside you? One side saying, "It was all me, I ruined it," and the other whispering, "Just forget it, it doesn't matter, they were the problem." It sounds like balance, but it is not. It's just swinging between self-destruction and denial. Between nights where you cannot sleep because you feel so wrong, and mornings where you go numb so you do not have to feel anything at all. What scares me most is how many gentle, caring people pick self-destruction over denial. You would rather hurt yourself than risk hurting someone else again. You replay every conversation at night, not because you enjoy suffering, but because it feels safer to decide you were the only one at fault than to accept that love is sometimes out of your control. If it was all you, then maybe you can fix it next time. That's the secret hope hiding under all that blame. But there is a third option: honest, nuanced responsibility. Seeing your part clearly without turning it into the whole story, and without shrinking it into nothing. It's not just about deciding who was right and who was wrong. It's about asking, what was truly mine, in a real, human way? And also, what belonged to their history, their fears, the timing, the things neither of us could touch. Because memory is biased. Your mind edits scenes to make you the main cause of every hurt. Self-blame becomes a coping mechanism, a way to feel less alone with the chaos. Your nervous system, your attachment, your old wounds, they all shaped how you reacted when you felt rejected or afraid. That doesn't make you broken. It just means there were reasons you froze, or chased, or stayed too long, or left too fast. There is a difference between regret and self-erasure. Regret says, "I wish I had done that differently." Self-erasure says, "I am the thing that was wrong." One invites growth. The other cancels you out of your own life. From here, healing will look like learning new questions to ask when the thought, "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," shows up. Questions that honor your impact without turning you into a monster. Questions that let you grieve the version of you that did not exist yet, while still choosing the version of you that is here now. You are allowed to grow from what happened without turning yourself into the enemy. You are allowed to grieve without sentencing yourself to a lifetime of punishment. Being alone with your memories tonight doesn't mean you have to be lonely inside them forever. From here, we're going to learn how to stay with the past without getting lost in it. How to honor what you wish you'd done differently, while finally learning how to love who you are now. When "if I had just" becomes a full-time job. You know those mornings where you wake up and before you even open your eyes, the first thought is, "If I had just..." Before your feet touch the floor, you're already back in that conversation. That night, that moment you wish you could rewrite, it feels less like remembering and more like clocking into a shift you never applied for. You stand in the shower and your body's here, but your mind is in a kitchen 3 months ago, saying the thing you wish you'd said instead. You walk to the train, to your car, through the office, and you're half a step behind your own life because you're busy editing the past. At night, when the silence gets loud, you replay the same scene again, convinced that if you just think about it from one more angle, you'll finally feel less hurt. You start to believe this is just how your brain works now. There's a name for what you're doing, even if it feels personal and private. Psychologists call it counterfactual thinking, the mind's habit of imagining. If only I had done this, things would be different. In small doses, it's supposed to help us learn. You touch something hot once, you remember not to do it again. But when love is involved, when being unchosen is involved, that learning instinct gets hijacked. It stops being insight and starts becoming self-punishment. The hardest part is, it doesn't look like punishment at first. It looks like responsibility. It looks like, I'm just trying to understand what went wrong. A single, grounded reflection sounds like, what can I learn from this so I don't repeat it? You ask the question, you feel the sting, you take a note, you move. But what you're living in is different. It's the same argument on loop, the same goodbye, the same text you sent, rewritten 100 ways, with no new conclusion. You notice that no matter how many times you replay it, you never arrive anywhere. There's no real closure, no clear answer, no moment where the scene finally lets you go. Just more exhaustion, more distance from the person sitting across from you at lunch. More nights where you're technically not alone, but you feel lonely because your mind is somewhere else entirely. This mental job has no paycheck. It doesn't pay you in peace. It only pays you in fatigue. What scares me most is how convincing the repetition is. When a thought shows up every hour, it starts to feel important just because it's loud. You start assuming, if my brain won't drop this, it must be true. I must have ruined everything. I must be the problem. But that doesn't make you broken. It just means your grief found a loop to run on. There's nothing wrong with wanting to understand. It's not just about letting it go and pretending you don't care. As long as you haven't gone numb, you'll keep reaching for meaning. But what if the goal isn't to finally finish the "if I had just" list? What if the real shift is stepping out of the role of unpaid, overworked detective and learning how to sit with the ache without interrogating yourself for hours? In the next part, I want to show you how to begin doing that, how to notice when you've crossed the line from reflection into self-torture, and gently walk yourself back to the present moment you still have. The invisible contract you think you broke. And when you start walking yourself back to the present, something strange usually appears in the doorway. This heavy, guilty feeling, like you're late on a payment. Like somewhere along the way, you signed a contract you don't even remember, promising you would keep this love, this friendship, this moment safe forever. And you broke it. You replay the last night you saw them, the last message you sent, the first red flag you ignored, and it all feels like evidence in a case against you. You tell yourself, I should have protected this. I should have tried harder. I should have known. It's not just about missing them. It's standing in the ruins feeling like the person who dropped the match, even if they walked away, even if they kept you in the dark. A lot of us were quietly taught that love is a kind of duty, that if something breaks, it means you failed your post. Maybe you grew up watching adults blame each other for every hurt, or you were the kid who kept the peace so no one would explode. You start to believe if someone is lonely, you should have stayed. If someone is hurt, you should have seen it coming. If someone leaves, it must be because you did something wrong. So this invisible contract shows up in your thoughts. I should have known better. I should have read between the lines. I should have been less needy, more patient, more understanding. The hardest part is how reasonable those sentences sound in your own head. They sound mature, responsible. They sound like growth. But sometimes they're just self-punishment dressed up as wisdom. Can we be honest about how unfair that contract actually is? You're expecting your past self to predict every outcome, read every hidden feeling, carry 100% of the responsibility for two people, in a world where timing and trauma and circumstances are constantly moving. Would you ever ask a friend to do that? Would you tell someone you love that if they had just said one perfect sentence, nothing bad would have happened? There's a fantasy underneath all this. If you had done X, Y, Z perfectly, they wouldn't have left. The relationship wouldn't have cracked. You wouldn't be alone in the silence now. What scares me most is how safe that fantasy can feel, because if it was all your fault, then maybe you could control it next time. But other people's choices were always in their hands. Their honesty, their capacity, their courage. You never held all of that. You can grieve what feels sacred and broken without agreeing that you were supposed to be a god. There's nothing wrong with crying over the version of the story you wanted, or the version of you that you wish had existed. That doesn't make you dramatic. It just means you cared. But the contract you think you broke? It was impossible to keep. It was never real. And if the contract was never real, then what does that make all the guilt you've been paying on it, month after month, year after year? Survivor's guilt in love. Why you feel like the one who ruined everything. If the contract was never real, then what does that make all the guilt you've been paying on it? This is where survivor's guilt sneaks in, not from a car crash or a disaster, but from love. In a breakup, survivor's guilt sounds like, I'm the one who walked away from the wreckage. I'm the one who ruined everything. You start treating the end of the relationship like an accident you should have prevented. In a relational context, survivor's guilt is that heavy, constant feeling that you were the emotional driver who caused the crash, even if you did not end it, even if you begged them to stay. You replay nights, conversations, the moment their face changed, and you tell yourself, if I had just turned sooner, braked earlier, loved better, they wouldn't be this hurt. It's not just about missing them, it's about feeling like you are now the danger. So the thoughts come. They'd be happier if they never met me. I destroyed their trust. I ruined their idea of love. You imagine them alone at night, staring at the ceiling because of you. You imagine them trying to love someone new and flinching because of you. And even if they also lied, or shut down, or pulled away first, you erase that part. You rewrite the story so that you are the one who did the unforgivable thing. The hardest part is, this guilt doesn't always care about facts. The relationship could have been mutual, complicated, full of both your shadows. They could have been the one who left, but seeing them hurt, or just imagining their hurt in the silence, makes you feel like someone has to pay. So you nominate yourself, because if you are the villain, at least there is a reason. At least the pain is ordered. Psychologists talk about how, after something painful, our minds search for a responsible party. It gives us the illusion of control. If it was your fault, then in some secret way, it was never random. That doesn't make you dramatic. It just means your brain is trying to protect you from the terror that some things fall apart, no matter how carefully you love. What scares me most is how the survivor's guilt in love starts to stain everything ahead of you. You start believing you don't deserve future love, or soft nights, or a partner who feels safe. You feel emotionally contaminated, like anyone who chooses you now is making a mistake. Being alone begins to feel like the only moral option. But survivor's guilt is less about truth and more about desperation. It's your mind saying, if I can explain this, I can survive it. So what if your guilt is not proof that you ruined everything, but proof that you care deeply about how your love lands on another person's life? What if the very thing you use to punish yourself is quiet evidence that you are never the villain you think you are? When taking all the blame feels safer than sharing it. So what if that guilt is really proof of how much you care? And still, you keep turning it into a verdict against yourself. You keep choosing, almost automatically, it was all my fault. Not because it feels good, but because it feels solid, predictable, like a story you can hold on to when everything else feels like loose air. The hardest part is, blaming yourself for everything hurts, but it also gives you something clear to stand on. If it was all you, then at least there's a rule. Be better next time, be quieter, be more patient, be less needy, and maybe love will stay. If it's all your fault, then in theory, you can fix it. You can prevent this exact kind of hurt from ever touching you again. You start treating your heart like a problem you can solve if you just find the right setting, because the alternative is terrifying, isn't it? The alternative is admitting that sometimes people leave even when you love them well. Sometimes they change in ways you couldn't predict. Sometimes they're not ready, or they're chasing something else. and it has nothing to do with your worth at all. It's not just about what you did or didn't say that night. It's about their history, their fears, their timing, their blind spots. And you cannot control those, no matter how hard you try. What scares me most, and maybe you feel this too, is the randomness of it. The way life can be unfair and unpredictable. How someone can promise you forever on a Sunday and feel distant by Thursday. So your mind builds a shield. No, it wasn't random. I was defective. Because if you were the problem, then the world isn't chaotic. It's logical. Painful, but logical. It's easier to believe you were wrong than to accept that sometimes love slips through your fingers for reasons you'll never fully understand. So you lie awake at night thinking, if I can figure out exactly what I did wrong, I'll never be blindsided again. You replay the same conversation, the same look on their face, over and over. You start watching yourself like a security camera, reviewing the footage of every moment you might have been too much or not enough. It becomes a kind of self-surveillance, a way to feel less alone with the hurt by constantly interrogating it. But there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that not everything was in your hands. That doesn't make you careless or selfish. It just means you're finally setting down what was never yours to carry. Their unspoken fears, their unfinished healing, the timing neither of you could control. You can still care, still want to grow, still take responsibility for your part without swallowing the whole story as your personal failure. So maybe the question isn't, what did I do wrong? Maybe the question is, where am I choosing the familiar pain of self-blame over the unfamiliar vulnerability of uncertainty? As long as you haven't asked that, you'll keep standing in the same spot, holding the same weight. So, gently, honestly, what scares you most about admitting that not everything was in your hands? The difference between accountability and self-punishment, so gently, honestly. What scares you most about admitting that not everything was in your hands? Because that's where another fork in the road appears. One path is accountability, the other is self-punishment. From the outside, they can look the same. You, lying awake at night, replaying what you said, what you didn't say, the moment their face changed. But inside, they feel completely different. Healthy accountability is you saying, this is the part that was mine. Not all of it, just your part. It's remembering that one argument and noticing, I shut down instead of saying I was hurt, and letting that insight soften you instead of crush you. It's not just about feeling bad, it's about feeling appropriate regret and then asking, what can I do differently next time? You start connecting the pain to a concrete change, even if it's small. Self-punishment is you watching the same scene like a movie you're forced to sit through forever. No new learning, no new understanding. Just the same line used as proof that you are fundamentally wrong, fundamentally unlovable. It's turning, I ignored a red flag, into, I ruin everything. It's turning, I raised my voice, into, this is why no one stays. That doesn't make you dramatic, it just means your hurt is looking for somewhere to land, and it keeps landing on you. The hardest part is, people who care deeply often confuse the two. You think the more you suffer, the more you're taking responsibility. As if love will come back if you can show you've punished yourself enough. As if feeling lonely and ashamed in silence is some kind of payment. But accountability is specific. This action, this moment, this pattern I want to change. Self-punishment is global. This proves I'm a bad person. This proves I'll always be alone. Ask yourself right now, is this helping me grow, or is this just making me smaller and more afraid? Is this leading to a concrete change, or am I just sinking deeper into the same hopeless story? When you're in accountability, it feels heavy but constructive, like carrying bricks to build something. When you're in self-punishment, it feels endless and disconnected from reality, like being sentenced without a trial. There's nothing wrong with wishing you had done better. What scares me most is when that wish becomes a life sentence. True responsibility isn't only about what you did to your past self. It's also about how you care for your future self. As long as you haven't included them in the conversation, you'll keep rewriting the same yesterday instead of building a different tomorrow. You are allowed to learn from what happened without locking yourself in emotional prison. You can say, "I'm sorry," and also, "I still deserve love." This isn't you escaping consequence. It's you choosing a softer kind of honesty, so that in the next part of your story, change comes from care, not fear. How your brain edits the past to make you the villain. The thing about memory is, it feels so certain. You lie there at night, staring at the ceiling, and the scene plays in your head like a movie you've watched 1,000 times. Same words, same expression on their face, same moment where you're sure you ruined everything. But your mind isn't pressing play on a recording. It's quietly redrawing the whole thing from scattered pieces. Memory is reconstructive. Every time you revisit a moment, you're not just watching it, you're editing it. You add emphasis. You lose details. You sharpen some parts until they hurt to look at. And after a painful ending, you start doing something very specific. You start highlighting every frame that supports the story. This was my fault. Not because you like hurting yourself, but because your brain is trying to make sense of why love slipped away. So you remember the one argument you started, but not the 3 times you apologized and tried to repair it. You remember the message you didn't send, the day you went quiet, the night you pulled back, but not the dozens of messages you did send, the days you showed up, the nights you stayed on the phone so they didn't feel alone. You remember the moment you snapped, but not the months you were patient. Does that feel familiar? Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but you don't need the term to know how it feels. Once your mind decides, "I ruined it," it starts searching the archives for proof. Every missed call, every awkward silence, every time you were tired and less present than you wanted to be, becomes exhibit A, B, and C. Anything that doesn't fit that story, the ways they pulled away, the mixed signals, the pressure you were under at work, the fear you were carrying from old hurt, those scenes get cut in silence. The hardest part is, this villain editing is subtle. You don't notice what's missing. You only notice what's loud and sharp and painful. You only see the version of you who failed, not the version who tried. And because the movie in your head feels so vivid, you trust it more than you trust your own softness. But this is a human brain thing, not a you thing. There's nothing wrong with you for replaying it like this. It just means your mind is trying to create a coherent story out of chaos, even if that story paints you as the one who broke what you were desperate to keep. What scares me most is how convincing that story can become when you're already feeling lonely and wrong. So what if you gently questioned your mental movie? What scenes are missing? What context, pressures, fears, or limitations from that time have been edited out? As long as you haven't seen the full cut, how can you be so sure you're the villain? If this version of you is just one edited cut, what else might be sitting on the cutting room floor, waiting to change the way you see yourself? Grieving the version of you who didn't exist yet. Maybe the full cut isn't just about what actually happened. Maybe it's also about who you wish you had been while it was happening. Do you notice that? How your mind doesn't just say, "I messed up." It whispers, "If only I'd been more secure, more patient, more honest, more healed, things would be different." It's not just about grieving the relationship or the outcome or the night everything finally broke. You're also grieving an invisible person, the version of you who would have done everything right, the one who would have seen every red flag the first time, the one who never raised their voice, never shut down, never clung too tightly or pulled away too fast, the one who always knew what to say so no one ever felt hurt or disappointed. In your head, This ideal self moves through the same scenes you did, but somehow they never get triggered. They stay calm when you felt desperate. They ask clear questions instead of over-explaining. They walk away when the other person shows you who they are, instead of waiting for love to finally choose you. They never send the extra text, never ignore the knot in their chest, never pretend they are fine when they are breaking. They are everything you wish you had been, standing in the same room where you once felt so small. The hardest part is that version of you feels so close it almost hurts to breathe. But they did not exist then. They are built from everything you know now, after the fact. They are made of hindsight, of lessons learned in the silence after the goodbye, of all the nights you stayed up replaying conversations until morning. You're comparing who you were in real time to a character you wrote with the answers to the test. What scares me most is how easily we forget that our past self was not lazy or careless or trying to ruin their own life. They were doing the best they could with the tools they had, the experiences they carried, the emotional capacity they had at that time. Maybe they had never seen healthy love before. Maybe they were already lonely and exhausted. Maybe they were surviving more than anyone knew. That doesn't make you broken. It just means you were human. So what if, instead of asking, why wasn't I better, you start asking, what was I missing back then that I didn't know how to give myself? Safety, reassurance, boundaries, a sense that you were already enough, even if no one chose you? This is grief work, too. You're allowed to mourn the person you wish you had been, while slowly learning to care for the person you actually were. And here is the quiet hope hiding underneath the hurt. The qualities you wish you had back then are not proof of failure. They are a map. They show you who you're becoming now, in the aftermath, in the long night after the ending. The story doesn't stop at who you weren't. It keeps going into who you still have time to be. Talking to your past self like someone you love. So instead of staying stuck in who you wish you were, I want to try something different with you. Not another round of what if I had just, but an actual meeting with the version of you that was there. The one you keep replaying at night. The one you blame in the silence when you feel most alone. Imagine you could walk back into that exact moment. Not as a prosecutor, building a case. As a friend who shows up late to the scene after everything has already gone wrong. You don't rush in shouting, how could you? You arrive slowly, like someone entering a room where a person is already shaking, already hurt, already overwhelmed. See them, that past you. What were you wearing? How tired were your eyes? Were your hands shaking? Or were you trying so hard to look calm that your whole body went stiff? The hardest part is admitting that version of you was not a villain. They were someone who didn't know yet what you know now. Someone who was trying to keep love, or keep safety, or just keep from falling apart. Ask them gently, what were you trying to protect? Wait for an answer, even if it only comes as a feeling in your chest. Then ask, what did you need that you didn't know how to ask for? Maybe it was reassurance. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was the courage to say, this hurts, instead of pretending everything was fine. When you speak to them, use you, not I. Say, you were scared, you were lonely. You were doing the best you could with what you had, instead of, I was so stupid. It's not just about grammar. It creates a little space, just enough distance from the self you keep beating up so you can finally see them as human, as someone you might actually care for. At first, this might feel fake, or cheesy, or completely undeserved. What scares me most is how quickly we believe we deserve punishment, and how slowly we accept tenderness. That doesn't make you broken. It just means you've been practicing self-blame for a long time, turning it into a way to feel in control of what hurt you. So here's a simple script you can borrow, whispering it to that past you. You did hurt people, including yourself. That's real. But you were also limited and afraid. You didn't know everything you know now. I'm not here to excuse what happened. I'm here to understand you, so we can do better without throwing you away. As long as you haven't gone completely numb, you can learn to talk to yourself like this. This isn't about erasing responsibility. It's about refusing to dehumanize yourself while you take it. And from here, we can start asking a different question. Not just, what did I do wrong? But, who do I want to be with the pain I have now? The myth of the one perfect moment that would have saved everything. Do you ever lie awake at night, replaying one conversation like it's the scene that ruined the whole movie? One sentence you wish you had swallowed, or said better. One moment you keep circling back to, as if love would have stayed if you had just been a little wiser, a little calmer, a little less you. We build this secret fantasy in our heads. If I had just said this one thing. If I had made that one mistake. If I had sent that text instead of overthinking it. In that fantasy, everything that hurt unhappens. They don't pull away. You're not alone. The story smooths out and you finally get to feel chosen. It's not just about missing them. It's about missing the version of yourself you think could have saved it. But the hardest part is, that fantasy is a myth. It takes a whole web of timing, emotional readiness, history, fear, and outside pressure, and shrinks it down into one heroic or catastrophic moment. It pretends that love is this delicate glass that shattered because of a single word, instead of something that was already cracking in quiet places long before the final drop. Think about the text you didn't send that night because you were scared of seeming needy. The apology you delayed because you didn't know how to say, "I was wrong," without drowning in shame. The boundary you didn't set when they canceled again and you said, "It's fine," even though it hurt. The night you shut down instead of opening up, because you were tired of being the only one who tried. Do you notice how many moments there actually were? What scares me most when I look at my own patterns is how easily I pretend all of that complexity could be rewritten by one perfect line. If one moment had that much power, does that mean all the other moments, all the other choices, didn't matter at all? Does that mean their fears, their past, their inconsistency, their silence, were just background noise? Relationships are patterns, not single scenes. They're built and broken over time through hundreds of small interactions, tiny choices, almost texts, half-truths, and quiet avoidances on both sides. That doesn't make you powerless, it just means you were never the only force in the room, and you were never supposed to carry everything alone. There's nothing wrong with longing for a save point, a magical reset button where you could go back, fix the line, and watch the credits roll differently. Stories do that. Games do that. Real life doesn't. As long as you haven't gone completely numb, you don't need a reset to be different. You start where you are. Instead of searching for the one perfect moment that would have saved everything, you can begin creating many small moments now that change how you move through the world. The way you answer your own hurt. The way you pause before abandoning yourself to keep someone else. The way you let silence mean what it actually means. You didn't miss your only chance at being different. You are standing in another chance right now, in this exact moment, with this breath, with this ache. And from here, we can stop trying to rewrite the past and start asking what kind of pattern you want to build next. What scares you most about letting yourself off the hook? So let me ask you something you usually avoid in the dark. If you stop blaming yourself, if you actually let yourself off the hook for what happened, what do you imagine would happen next? Not in theory, not in some perfect world. In your real life, in your real chest, on a real night when the silence gets loud and the memories feel close. Do you feel that little panic rise up when you even picture it? As if the moment you loosen your grip on the guilt, you'll slide into being careless or selfish or someone who doesn't really love. Maybe you tell yourself, if I forgive myself, I'll repeat the same mistake. I'll become selfish. I'll forget how much I hurt them. I'll lose my sense of responsibility. It's not just about the past anymore. It's about who you're afraid you'll turn into without this constant ache keeping you in line. The hardest part is, those fears sound noble in your head. They sound like proof that you're one of the good ones. As long as you haven't stopped hurting, you feel like you haven't stopped caring. Self-blame becomes this moral anchor you cling to. If you're still suffering, then you must be serious about love. If you still feel lonely and wrong about what you did, then maybe you're not as bad as you fear. But what scares me most is how quietly that logic turns into a cage. You start believing that pain is the only honest evidence that you care. That if you ever feel light again, you've minimized the impact. That if you ever speak to yourself with tenderness, you're disrespecting the person who was hurt. That doesn't make you a monster. It just means you've confused punishment with responsibility. What if care could look different? What if growth, changed behavior, and the way you move in your next relationship are also evidence that you took this seriously? There's nothing wrong with remembering. There's nothing wrong with feeling the sting when a similar situation comes up. But you don't have to keep hanging yourself on the sharpest version of the story to prove you learned something. So be honest with yourself for a moment. When you imagine softening toward yourself, what bad things do you see in your mind, like a warning movie? Do you see yourself becoming cold and careless? Do you see yourself forgetting their face, their hurt, their tears? Or is it more that you're afraid of no longer having a clear reason to hate yourself, and then you won't know who you are without that? If you can, write it down. Every fear, every sentence that starts with, "If I forgive myself, then..." Bring those quiet threats into the light. Look at them with the same compassion you would offer a friend. And then just sit with this question for a while, without rushing to solve it. What if the very thing you're most afraid of, becoming careless, is actually less likely when you treat yourself with care? The quiet cost of carrying all the blame. Because while you're sitting with that question, your body is already answering in its own way, isn't it? The tight chest that shows up out of nowhere. The shallow breathing when you remember a specific moment. The way your shoulders creep up toward your ears and stay there all day, like you're bracing for a hit that never quite lands, but never fully leaves. Nights are the loudest. You lie there in the dark, exhausted and wired at the same time, replaying what you could have done differently. You start drifting off, and then your brain throws you a scene from 3 years ago, and suddenly your heart is racing like it's happening again. You wake up feeling like you ran a marathon in your sleep. No amount of rest fully fixes it, because the war you're fighting is inside you. And it doesn't just live in your body, it seeps into love too. Someone tells you they care, and instead of warmth, you feel panic. You wait for them to find out who you really are and leave. Every kind gesture is followed by the thought, if they knew everything, they wouldn't stay. The hardest part is you start treating their affection like a mistake that needs to be corrected, instead of something you're allowed to receive, so you pull back first. Or you over-explain every small flaw, almost daring them to walk away. You turn down invitations that feel too good, opportunities that might see you in a kinder light. You stay in situations where you're treated poorly because some quiet part of you whispers, "This is what you deserve." That doesn't make you broken. It just means self-blame has been steering your choices for so long that safety feels wrong and hurt feels familiar. Inside your mind, there is almost no silence. Every joy is interrupted by, "But remember what you did." Every compliment passes through a filter. If they knew the whole story, they wouldn't say that. It's not just about feeling guilty for the past. It's like you've built a small courtroom in your head and you're always on trial. No verdict, just endless cross-examination. What scares me most about that is how this punishment doesn't stay in the past. You re-injure yourself in the present over and over, as if the only way to prove you're sorry is to never stop hurting. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to take responsibility, but at what point does responsibility turn into self-destruction? Maybe a part of you believes this is the price you have to pay. As long as you haven't suffered enough, you don't deserve another chance. But how many years are you willing to spend paying a debt that may not even be real? It's not just about being kinder to yourself for comfort's sake. Your life, your energy, your capacity to love also matter. If you're going to keep paying a price, maybe it could be the price of learning new ways to be with yourself, instead of endlessly hurting yourself. What would it look like to try that, even a little? Learning to hold two truths at once. What would it look like to try that, even a little? Maybe it starts with something your brain is not used to yet. Letting two things be true at the same time. Not choosing between I was wrong or I was right. Not choosing between I hurt them or I'm a good person. Just letting both sit in the same room with you for a moment. The hardest part is your mind is used to extremes. It swings between I did nothing wrong, they overreacted, and it was all my fault, I ruined everything. Total innocence or total blame. Perfect victim or perfect villain. That black and white place feels safer because it's simple. If you're completely blameless, you don't have to change. If you're completely bad, you don't have to hope. But living there keeps you stuck. If you're not allowed to be partly responsible, you can't grow. If being responsible means you're entirely unworthy of love, you can't forgive yourself. You start believing that as long as you haven't punished yourself enough, you're not allowed to move forward. So you stay in the same lonely story, replaying the same night, searching for a version where you finally feel clean. What if the truth is softer and more complicated? I hurt someone and I am still worthy of love. I wish I'd done better and I did the best I could with what I knew then. What I did wasn't okay, and I'm learning from it. That doesn't make you careless, it just means you're human, with a past you're allowed to learn from instead of endlessly relive. Think about them too. Maybe they were hurting, overwhelmed, carrying their own history. You can say, they were in pain and I still had choices. They loved me in the ways they knew how, and it wasn't enough for what I need. You're not erasing your hurt by seeing their side. You're just letting the full picture in, instead of clinging to a version where one of you has to be the monster. What scares me most about this both slash and space is how unstable it feels at first. There's no neat identity to hide in. You're not the always wrong one or the always right one. You're just a person. Some nights that feels like standing in the dark with no script, only silence and your own breathing. But that's also where real maturity in love begins. Because it's not just about proving you were right or wrong. It's about being able to hold your own humanity without collapsing. Tonight, try one small both slash and sentence about the situation that haunts you, even if it feels awkward or unearned. Whisper it into the night. The more you practice holding two truths, the less power any single punishing story will have over you. And that's where your next chapter quietly starts to open. Why it feels easier to believe you're unlovable. And when you start to loosen that one punishing story, something unsettling happens. The silence it leaves behind gets loud. Because if this wasn't all your fault, then you're left with the question you've been trying not to touch. Why does it feel so true when you tell yourself, I ruin people. I'm too much. I don't deserve a healthy love after what I've done. The hardest part is, those sentences don't feel like thoughts. They feel like facts. You repeat them at night the way someone else might repeat a prayer. Not because you enjoy hurting yourself, but because believing you're unlovable gives you a kind of certainty. And certainty, even when it hurts, can feel safer than not knowing. If you already know you're the problem, you don't have to sit in that open, aching space of, maybe nothing I did could have saved it. It's not just about shame, it's about control. If you decide, I ruin people, then every breakup, every rejection, every person who doesn't choose you has an explanation. painful, but neat. If you decide, I'm too much, you never have to wonder why someone pulled away. You already have the answer. What scares me most is how comforting that can start to feel. You suffer, but at least the story is consistent. There's a protection in it too. If you believe you don't deserve love, then you never have to risk letting real love in and losing it. You never have to face the terror of being fully seen and then left anyway. As long as you haven't questioned the I'm unlovable story, you get to stay in control of the rejection. You're the one who turns yourself away first. That doesn't make you weak or dramatic. It just means you found a way to survive the kind of hurt that once left you on the floor. Over time, this doesn't stay a sentence in your head. It becomes an identity you wear. Not, I did something wrong, but I am what's wrong. You start walking into every room, every date, every silence, assuming you're already disqualified. And when someone is kind or wants you, it almost feels like they've misread you. Like if they really knew you, they'd leave. Most of the time, this belief didn't start with this one person or this one ending. It echoes older nights, earlier rejections, the way you were spoken to growing up, the love you had to chase or earn. The intensity of your self-blame now might be less about this specific situation and more about all the old pain it woke up at once. That's why it feels so big. You're not just grieving this loss, you're grieving every version of you that was told, directly or quietly, that they were too much or not enough. So I want to ask you something that might feel almost wrong to consider. Who would you be without the story? I am unlovable because of what happened. If that sentence suddenly disappeared, what would you be allowed to hope for? What kind of love might you actually be worthy of learning to receive if the old story isn't the truth you have to live under anymore? Letting yourself be a work in progress, not a finished verdict, maybe that's the real shift. Instead of asking, what love am I allowed to hope for? You start asking, who am I allowed to be now? Not as a punishment, not as a verdict, but as a work in progress you're still getting to know. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing yourself as someone changing and started treating yourself like a case that's already been closed. I'm the one who ruins things. I'm the one who's too much. I'm the one no one stays for. Do you hear how final that sounds? Like a judge hit the gavel in the middle of the night and decided who you are forever, based on the worst chapter of your story. That's what self-blame does. It freezes you in time. It takes the moment you felt most alone, most wrong, most unchosen, and says, this is the real you. Everything else was a lie. It's not just about taking responsibility. It's about trying to feel in control of a hurt you couldn't actually control. If you were the whole problem, then maybe you could have fixed it. Maybe you could have saved it. That fantasy can feel safer than admitting some things end no matter how hard you love. But you are not a verdict. You are a process. There's a quiet difference between I'm toxic and I'm someone who is learning not to shut down when I'm scared. Between I'm broken and I'm someone who is practicing safer boundaries so I don't abandon myself for love. One slams the door on your future. The other leaves it slightly open, even if the room is still messy. Growth isn't neat. You will repeat patterns. You will say, I'll never chase again. And then find yourself staring at your phone in the silence, wanting to send one more message. You will promise, next time I'll speak up, and still swallow your needs because you're afraid they'll leave. That doesn't make you hopeless. It just means healing is uneven. You can backslide and still be further along than you were last year. What scares me most in myself and in you is not the mistakes. It's when we decide we're only allowed to be seen once we're fixed. The hardest part is letting someone meet you while you're still becoming, while you're still clumsy with your words, still practicing honesty, still learning to stay when you want to run. But that's where real love lives, in the middle, not at the polished end. So, gently, can we try something? Think of one label you've been using against yourself. Maybe it's I'm needy, or I'm cold, or I'm bad at relationships. Now rewrite it as a process. I'm someone who is learning to ask for reassurance without apologizing. I'm someone who is learning to let people closer, slowly. I'm someone who is learning what a healthy relationship even feels like. Say it in your head. Notice how your body feels when you do. There's nothing wrong with holding yourself accountable when you've caused harm. Being a work in progress doesn't erase the apologies you owe or the patterns you need to change. It doesn't excuse anything. It just means you are not condemned to be only who you were at your worst moment. As long as you haven't gone numb, as long as you still feel that ache to do better, there is room for you to grow into someone softer, steadier, safer, for yourself first, and then for whoever is brave enough to love you next. Every time you choose the in-progress version of you over the verdict, you loosen the grip of the past on who you're allowed to become. And that's where the next part of this story begins. Not with a perfect partner, but with a different way you meet yourself the next time you're hurt. Loving the you who didn't know how yet. And when the next hurt comes, you notice something. You don't just feel the pain of what happened now. You feel the echo of every moment you keep thinking, I should have known better. It's like the night gets crowded with old versions of you, all standing there in the silence, asking the same question. What could I have done differently? You keep going back there because you're not seeing the past with the eyes you had then. You're seeing it with the eyes of who you are now, with the skills you've learned, with the language you finally have for things like attachment, boundaries, nervous systems. Of course, it looks obvious from here, but obvious now doesn't mean it was obvious then. The hardest part is accepting that the you back there truly didn't know how yet. How to say, this hurts me, without exploding or shutting down. How to stop texting when the silence was already an answer. How to walk away from being half chosen instead of trying to perform your way into being fully loved. You weren't pretending not to know. You genuinely didn't know. And what scares me most is how quickly we turn that gap into proof that something is wrong with us. You look at who you wish you'd been, calm, clear, secure, and you use that imaginary version as a weapon against the person you actually were. But the distance between those two selves, that doesn't make you broken. It just means you have grown. So you start small. Name one concrete way you are different now. Maybe you can feel your body tightening before you send the desperate message, and you pause. Maybe you know what the word avoidant means, and you stop taking their distance as proof you're unlovable. Maybe you have one boundary you didn't have before. You no longer beg people to stay. Let that count. Say it out loud, even if it feels silly. There's nothing wrong with whispering, I didn't know how back then, but I know this now. Then, if it feels safe, place a hand over your heart. Imagine the you from that old scene sitting across from you. In your mind, write them a short note. You hurt people here. You were hurt here. You were human here. I see all of it. It's not just about excusing what happened. Accountability still matters. Repair still matters where it's possible. But refusing to abandon yourself in the moment you most needed understanding is a different kind of responsibility. It's saying, I will not leave myself alone in that room again, even if no one else comes back to offer closure. Because as long as you haven't gone numb, you still get to choose how this story shapes you. The way you treat your past self now becomes the template for how you'll treat your future self when you inevitably make mistakes again. Will you meet them with punishment or with the same steady love you're learning to give yourself tonight? Somewhere, a version of you is still convinced they ruined everything. Let this be the quiet promise you send back through time. You are allowed to keep learning, to keep loving, to keep becoming someone your past self never even knew was possible. And we're not done yet. There is still more of you to meet. When memory turns into a weapon, how your brain rewrites the story against you. And part of meeting more of you is realizing this. Your memory is not a courtroom transcript. It's not a perfect replay of what happened. It's a story your brain keeps rewriting in the middle of the night, under pressure, under loneliness, under the hurt of not being chosen. Have you noticed how the same scene feels different depending on the day? One night you remember how kind you were, how much you tried. Another night, the exact same moment turns into proof that you were selfish, needy, too much. The hardest part is, it all feels true while you're remembering it. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, and you think, if I had just done that one thing differently, maybe they would have stayed. But memory doesn't work like a video. It works like a sketch that keeps getting traced over. Every time you revisit it, you add lines, erase details, darken certain parts. Longing makes you highlight their softness and your supposed failures. Regret makes you zoom in on the one sentence you wish you could take back and blur out every time they were distant. Rejection makes you rewrite the entire story so that the ending is your fault. Because if it was your fault, then maybe it was also in your control. Think about that one argument you keep replaying. At first, you might have remembered how they raised their voice, how they walked away. Months later, you mostly remember the moment you snapped, the words you regret, the look on their face when they shut down. Same night, same room, different story. Or the last date before things faded. At the time, you felt them pulling back. Now, you only remember the joke you made that landed wrong, and you start believing that was the moment you ruined everything. What scares me most is how convincing these edited versions can be. Your brain is trying to protect you from the chaos of maybe it was never going to work, so it offers you a cleaner line. I broke it. It's not just about blame, it's about control. If you were the problem, then you can fix yourself and never be left again. There's nothing wrong with wanting to grow, to take responsibility where it's real. But when every memory turns into a weapon against you, that doesn't make you honest. It just means you're hurting. As long as you haven't gone numb, your mind will keep reaching back, trying to understand. So the next time that scene plays in the silence of the night, gently question it. What details are missing? What were you afraid of then that you can see more clearly now? Could there be another version of that memory where you were doing the best you could with what you knew? Your memories are allowed to be incomplete. You are allowed to hold them softer. What if your memory isn't telling the whole truth about you? And the real story is kinder than you think. The highlight reel of your worst moments. Why your brain keeps replaying that one scene. And yet, even knowing that, there's still that one scene your mind won't let go of, isn't there? That one argument, that one sentence you wish you could swallow back. That one look on their face when they finally shut down. You don't replay the whole relationship at night. You replay that moment, over and over, like your brain cut out every soft day, every quiet laugh, and decided, this is the truth, this is who you are. You start to feel like the entire story of you and them has been condensed into that single failure, like everything else was just a prelude to you messing it up. Maybe it was the night you snapped and raised your voice. Maybe it was the message you didn't answer fast enough. Maybe it was the last time you saw them, the way you pretended you were fine while your chest ached. The hardest part is how vivid it feels. You remember the way the room looked, the exact tone you used, the silence after. You remember their eyes more clearly than you remember all the times they chose you. Your brain thinks it's helping. It's not just about punishing you. It's trying to extract a lesson, to rewind the tape until you find the exact moment you could have turned the steering wheel and avoided the crash. If you can locate the mistake, maybe you can promise yourself you'll never do it again. Maybe you can feel in control of something that felt so out of your hands. But what scares me most is how often that search for control just deepens your shame instead. You don't walk away thinking, I learned. You walk away thinking, I am the problem. And the more your mind rehearses that scene, the more convincing it becomes. Repetition turns a fragment into a verdict, It just means your pain has been practicing its lines for a long time. So you build a whole theory of the past around that one instant. If I hadn't said that, if I had stayed calmer, if I had understood their hurt, you start believing that if that one moment had gone differently, everything else would have been perfect and safe. No breakup, no distance, no lonely night staring at your phone in the dark. It feels easier to believe you ruined something perfect than to face that it was never only yours to save. But that doesn't make it true. That scene is not the whole story. It's a page, not the book. There's nothing wrong with remembering it, but what if you gently asked your mind to remember something else too? The neutral days where nothing dramatic happened. The small kindnesses. The times you tried. You rarely replay those with the same intensity, do you? As long as you haven't gone completely numb, your memory is still flexible. You're allowed to hold the bad moments and still remember the good. If your brain only replays the worst parts, how can you trust the way you see the past? The perfect past that never existed. How longing makes before look flawless. So if you can't fully trust the way you see the past when it's all dark and loud in your head, what is it you keep clinging to? Most nights, it's not the whole relationship you replay. It's a highlight reel. The soft focus montage where the light is always warm, their voice is always gentle, and you always feel chosen. After loss, your mind does something quiet but powerful. It compares the cold of now with the warmth of before, and the contrast makes the past look softer than it really was. Right now, there is silence, distance, a bed that feels too big. Back then, there was someone's laugh in your kitchen, a hand on your back, a message lighting up your phone at night. Of course, your brain leans toward that. It hurts less to remember the glow than to sit in the dark. The hardest part is, your memory doesn't just highlight the good, it edits. It cuts entire scenes. The Sunday afternoons where you felt strangely lonely sitting next to them. The way your chest tightened when they canceled again. The arguments that ended with you apologizing, even when you weren't sure what you did wrong. Those moments get pushed to the edges, while the golden ones sit in the center like proof that you once had perfect love. You start telling yourself a story. It was all good until you broke it. If the past feels flawless, then you must be the flaw. That's how self-blame sneaks in and feels almost comforting. If you were the problem, then maybe you could have controlled it. Maybe one different sentence, one less need, one more chance, and you'd still have them. It's not just about missing the person. It's about missing the version of yourself you wish you had been with them. But what if the past wasn't as perfect as your grief wants you to believe? Not to tear it down, not to make them the villain, but to make the truth less sharp on your skin. Can you remember the way your stomach dropped when they went quiet for days? The half answers when you asked how they felt? The plans they kept forgetting to make? That doesn't make the good moments fake. It just means the full story was always mixed. What scares me most is how quickly we turn a mixed human relationship into a myth we worship and punish ourselves with. There's nothing wrong with honoring what was beautiful, but can you also honor the small, inconvenient truths that show you it wasn't only you holding a perfect thing and somehow letting it slip? As long as you haven't erased those cracks, you can start seeing that you didn't ruin a flawless past. You lost something real and imperfect, and that's a different kind of grief. Stay with that difference for a moment, because the way you see the past is shaping how harshly you judge yourself now, and how you'll let yourself love again next. When you become the villain in your own love story, stay with that difference and then notice what your mind does next. Do you feel it quietly sliding back into the same old story? The one where none of that nuance really matters, because in the end, you were the one who ruined everything. You start replaying the same 3 scenes like a movie on a loop. The night you snapped. The message you did not send. The moment you saw the hurt on their face and froze instead of reaching for their hand. It's not just about what actually happened anymore. It becomes this heavy, tangled narrative where every flaw you had, every need you voiced, every boundary you tried to set turns into proof that you were the problem. That if you had been calmer, less sensitive, less lonely, love would have stayed. The hardest part is how convincing that story feels at 2 a.m. When the house is quiet and the silence gets loud, you start believing that because you're still here, still breathing, still moving through days without them, you must have done something wrong. Survivor's guilt in relationships sounds dramatic, but that's what it is. They're gone. You're left. So your brain fills the gap with blame. If I'm the one who messed it up, then at least there's a reason I'm alone. What scares me most is how safe that blame can feel. Saying, I ruined it, hurts, but it's a clean hurt. It gives the chaos an anchor. If you're the villain, then the story makes sense. There's a clear cause, a clear punishment, a clear way to explain why love slipped through your fingers. A doesn't hurt most. B does. The breakup doesn't hurt most. The belief that you deserved it does. There's nothing wrong with taking responsibility for the ways you hurt someone. That doesn't make you broken. It just means you're capable of love. Healthy accountability sounds like, I interrupted them a lot when they were vulnerable. I want to learn to listen better. But the story you tell yourself at night is different, isn't it? It sounds like, I never really loved them right. I ruin everything I touch. I am the reason I'm unchosen. One is about behavior. The other is about your entire worth. As long as you haven't noticed that difference, you'll keep confessing to crimes you didn't commit. You'll keep rewriting the past so that every complexity, every mismatch, every circumstance becomes more evidence that you were secretly the villain all along. But what if you were never meant to be the villain at all? The safety of blaming yourself, control disguised as punishment. What if you were never meant to be the villain at all? I know that sounds almost wrong when you've spent so many nights building a whole case against yourself. But underneath all the self-blame, there's a quieter logic running the show. It whispers, if it was my fault, then I can fix me. And if I can fix me, maybe I'll never get hurt like this again. You start replaying that last conversation at 2 a.m., convinced one different sentence could have saved everything. Not because you enjoy torturing yourself, but because it feels safer to believe there was a key you just didn't find in time. The hardest part is accepting that some endings don't have keys. Some people leave not because you were unlovable, but because of their wounds, their timing, their confusion. And that's terrifying, isn't it? To admit that love can end for reasons you will never fully understand. So your mind reaches for the simpler equation. If I caused it, I can control it. It's not just about this one person. It becomes about every future person, every future night. If you can identify the exact thing you did wrong, you can promise yourself you'll never do it again. You'll be perfect, careful, endlessly accommodating. You'll study your own heart like a problem to be solved instead of something that's allowed to be human. On the surface, this feels like safety. What scares me most is how hidden the cost is. You gain a sense of control, but you pay with chronic shame. You start living under constant self-surveillance, watching every word, every text, every silence, as if you're one misstep away from proving you're the problem after all. Nights get heavier, not because you're alone, but because you're never actually off duty from monitoring yourself. Psychologists have a name for this mental rewriting of the past with if-only scenes, but you don't need the term to know how it feels. It's that ache of survivor's guilt in relationships, where you stand in the ruins and decide you must be responsible for every broken piece. There's nothing wrong with wanting to grow, to take honest accountability for where you did contribute to the hurt. But that doesn't make it love to attack yourself for everything that was never yours to carry. The hardest part is noticing the bargain you've made. Has blaming yourself actually protected you? Or has it just kept you in a constant state of self-attack? Too exhausted to trust, too ashamed to be fully seen. As long as you haven't questioned that, you'll keep wounding yourself in the name of protection. If hurting yourself hasn't kept you safe, what else might be possible? Healthy accountability versus self-destruction. How to tell the difference. If hurting yourself hasn't kept you safe, then what is accountability supposed to feel like? Because I know you're scared of letting yourself off the hook. You think if you stop blaming yourself, you'll repeat everything that went wrong. But healthy accountability isn't about letting yourself slide. It's about finally telling the truth without stabbing yourself with it. Healthy accountability is specific. It sounds like, in that conversation, I shut down instead of saying I was hurt. Next time, I want to say it sooner. It's time-bound, grounded in moments you can actually see, not in a vague feeling that you're broken. It focuses on behavior and repair. What you did, what you wish you'd done, what you can try differently with the next person who loves you. It doesn't turn one night into your entire identity. Destructive rumination is the opposite. It's vague and global. It sounds like, I ruin everything, I'm unlovable, I am the problem. It's not just about what happened, it becomes who you are. You stop talking about a relationship that ended and start talking like you are the ending. The hardest part is, this can feel like honesty, when really it's just a more sophisticated way to abandon yourself. Think about the same scene through both lenses. You snapped at them in an argument, raised your voice, said something you regret. Healthy accountability says, I was overwhelmed and I lashed out. That doesn't make me a monster, but it did hurt them. If I could go back, I'd take a breath, ask for a pause, and name that I feel scared instead of shouting. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do better. It just means you still care how your love lands. Destructive rumination takes that same moment and stretches it over your whole life. Of course they left. I always do this. No one can stay with me. I'm impossible to love. Notice the shift. One version is about a choice you made in a specific night. The other is about your worth as a person. One leaves room for change. The other leaves you alone with a life sentence. So how do you tell which one you're practicing, especially in the silence after midnight, when everything feels heavier? You start asking yourself simple questions. Am I talking about what I did or who I am? When I finish this thought, do I feel a tiny bit more capable of repairing or just more convinced I'm hopeless? Is there a clear next step or only a familiar ache? What scares me most is how easy it is to cross that line without noticing. As long as you haven't learned to check in, your mind will keep calling self-harm reflection. In the next part, I want to show you how to step out of that spiral and what it looks like to grieve your mistakes without making them your whole name. When reflection turns into self-interrogation, so when does reflection quietly turn into an interrogation room? For me, it usually starts at night. The house is still, the screen is finally off, and there's this heavy silence where love used to feel possible. That's when my mind pulls out the bright light, sits me in the metal chair, and starts asking questions I already know I can't answer correctly. The tone changes first. It's not gentle curiosity anymore. It's tense and urgent, like there's a deadline to prove I'm not the reason I'm alone. Every thought feels like I'm on trial with no chance of acquittal. Why did you say that? Why didn't you see the signs? Why did you stay when you were already hurt? These aren't real questions. They're accusations dressed up as concern, and you can feel the verdict has already been written. You start demanding explanations from yourself that you would never demand from someone you love. You start forcing confessions. Be honest, you ruined it. If you'd been better, they would have stayed. You replay the same conversation, the same night, the same look on their face, scanning every frame for proof of your guilt. It's not just about understanding what went wrong anymore. It's about proving that you were the problem, because somehow that feels safer than believing you were never really chosen. The hardest part is how your body joins in before you even notice. Your chest gets tight, like there's a hand pressing down on your heart. Your jaw clenches. Your shoulders creep up toward your ears. Your breathing goes shallow, as if your own thoughts are a threat you have to brace against. You lie in bed, eyes open in the dark, sleep hovering just out of reach. Even during the day, there's this constant sense of being on edge with yourself, like you're walking past a closed door where you're being questioned inside. Research calls it rumination or counterfactual thinking. But in your actual life, it just feels like grief with a spotlight on it. You're not only mourning the person, you're mourning the version of you that you think could have saved everything. If only I'd been calmer, kinder, less needy. It's easier to believe I ruined it than to accept it was never fully in my control. That doesn't make you broken. It just means control feels safer than randomness, even when that control comes in the form of self-blame. There's nothing wrong with wanting to learn from what happened. Healthy reflection asks, what can I carry forward? Self-interrogation hisses, what is so wrong with you that this happened at all? One invites growth, the other keeps you in a cell, and the cruel twist is, this harshness probably started as a survival strategy. If you can catch every mistake, maybe you can stop love from leaving next time. Maybe you can stop ending up lonely in the silence. But what scares me most is how quickly that survival strategy turns into self-cruelty. As long as you haven't noticed the shift, you'll keep mistaking punishment for progress. So before we talk about a different way, just notice, does your body feel like it's under attack when you reflect? Do you walk away with more shame than clarity? If so, you're not learning, you're being interrogated. And you don't deserve to live like that. What would it feel like to question yourself with kindness instead? The questions you're asking yourself are rigged. If you listen closely to that inner interrogation, you'll notice something quietly cruel about it. It's not just the tone, it's the questions themselves. In the middle of the night, when the silence feels heavier and you're replaying everything you did and didn't do, what are you actually asking yourself? What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? How could I be so stupid? Why didn't I just say something different? Those questions sound like you're trying to understand, but they're rigged. They don't leave room for context, for the fact that you were scared or lonely or trying your best with the love you had at the time. They start with the assumption that you are the problem, that you were the one wrong note that ruined the whole song. The hardest part is, you've asked them so often they feel like the only honest way to talk to yourself. But questions like, what's wrong with me, can't lead you to healing, because they already decided the verdict before the trial began. They don't look for reasons, they look for a confession. They demand that you admit you're defective, dramatic, too much, not enough. It's not just about finding what you could have done differently, it's about proving that you were the one who ruined what could have been. And if you believe that, of course you stay stuck. Of course you keep going back over the same night, the same sentence, the same goodbye. What scares me most is how convincing these questions can be. They sound responsible. They sound like accountability. But healthy accountability asks, what was happening for me? Not, why am I such a mess? One opens a door, the other locks you in a room with your worst fears. There's nothing wrong with wanting to understand your part. That doesn't make you weak or self-obsessed. It just means you care about how you love, and you don't want to hurt anyone again, including yourself. So when you notice the old question starting, you start there. You notice the script, why am I like this? And you gently rewrite it. What was I feeling in that moment? What did I need that I didn't know how to ask for? What did I believe about myself that made that choice seem like the only option? Do you feel the difference? One set of questions hunts for a flaw. The other looks for a story. You can even try this. Instead of, how could I be so stupid? Ask, what was I trying to protect? Instead of, why didn't I just move on? Ask, what part of me was still hoping? And what was that hope built on? As long as you haven't shut your heart down completely, you will make choices from longing. That doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. These new questions won't erase the hurt, but they will soften the way you hold it. And in the next part, I want to talk about something even harder. How to grieve the version of you who didn't know how to love themselves yet, and stop punishing them for not being the person you're only becoming now. Grieving the version of you who didn't know yet. If you're still haunted by what you could have done differently, there's another layer underneath it that almost no one talks about. You're not just grieving them, or the future you imagine with them. You're grieving the version of you who didn't know yet. The hardest part is those quiet moments at night, when the house is still, and the silence feels heavier than it should. You replay the same conversation again, the same argument, the same goodbye. You tell yourself, if I had just stayed calmer, if I had loved them better, if I had been more secure, less needy, more healed. You start believing there was one perfect version of you that could have saved it all, and you failed to become them in time. But that version only exists in your head. The you who actually lived that relationship was not a villain. They were someone doing the best they could with what they knew, what they'd been taught, and what they'd survived. It's not just about choices in a vacuum. It's about nervous systems shaped by old hurt, patterns you copied without realizing, beliefs about love you never knew were wrong. Think about how young you were in some of those memories, even if you weren't technically a kid. How lonely you felt, how badly you wanted to be chosen. What scares me most is how easily we forget the conditions we were living in when we judge ourselves now. We look back with today's awareness and punish yesterday's self for not having it yet. That doesn't make you fair. It just means you're holding a trial with evidence your past self never had. What if you stopped seeing that earlier, you as the enemy, and started seeing them as someone you might actually mourn? Someone you might feel tenderness for? Imagine watching a recording of that past version of you. The way their voice shook when they tried to set a boundary. The way they over-apologized. The way they stayed up at night wondering why love hurt so much. Could you really say they were cruel on purpose? Or would you see someone scared and trying? Grief here is letting yourself say, I wish you had felt safer. I wish you had known your worth sooner. I wish you hadn't needed their love so badly to feel like you weren't alone. There's nothing wrong with those wishes. They're honest. They name what wasn't possible then. But grief is different from a life sentence. As long as you haven't gone numb, you can choose to put the gavel down. You can let the sadness of, I didn't know, exist without turning it into, I am permanently wrong. In the next part, I want to talk about how to begin that forgiveness in practice, and how to talk to your past self in a way that finally lets both of you rest. The hardest part, letting go of the person you thought you should have been. So when I say forgiveness, I don't just mean forgiving the you who made the obvious mistakes. I mean facing the ghost of the person you think you should have been. Do you feel them standing next to you when you replay the past at night? That version of you who always knows the right thing to say, never raises their voice, never freezes, never walks away too early or stays too long. In your head, they are calm when you are shaking. They listen when you shut down. They send the perfect text instead of the one you regret. They never get jealous, never get triggered, never panic and beg, never go cold and distant. They are endlessly understanding, endlessly patient, endlessly kind. It's not just about being better, they are flawless. And next to them, how could you ever feel like enough? What scares me most is how quietly that fantasy self turns into a weapon. You start using them like a measuring stick you beat yourself with. Every memory becomes a courtroom. They would have stayed if I'd been more like that. They would have loved me if I hadn't said this. Being alone doesn't hurt the most. Being convinced you ruined your chance at love does. Psychologists call it rewriting the past with if-only scenes, but you just call it another sleepless night. You start believing that pain means proof. Proof you were the problem. Proof you were the wrong choice. Proof that love is something you could have kept if you'd been more perfect. But that doesn't make it true. It just means your brain is trying to find control in what felt uncontrollable. The hardest part is admitting that this perfect version of you never existed. They weren't there in those rooms. They weren't carrying your history, your fear, your nervous system, your loneliness. You were. The hardest part is accepting that you were never meant to be flawless, to be worthy of staying, worthy of being chosen, worthy of love. There's nothing wrong with wishing you had done better. That's how we grow. But when the wishing turns into worship of a person who only lives in your imagination, you stay stuck bowing to them instead of meeting yourself. As long as you haven't questioned whether they're even real, you'll keep chasing a standard that keeps moving just out of reach. So I want to offer you something simple. Imagine that ideal version of you sitting across from you in the quiet. Notice their calm, their softness, their patience. Then notice their distance. Notice how they never actually had to live your life. In your mind, place your hand over theirs and say, "Thank you for showing me what I value, but I am the one who's here." You can picture yourself opening a window, letting the night air in, and watching that imagined self dissolve into the dark, not as punishment, but as release. You're not abandoning them, you're releasing the demand to become them. Because the next part of this is learning how to love the you who stayed, the you who survived, the you who is still here, waiting to be chosen by you first. Learning to love the you who actually lived it, so I want to try something with you. Not in theory, not as another idea to think about, but as a quiet practice you can actually feel in your body. Picture one specific moment from that relationship that still wakes you up at night. Maybe it's the argument where your voice shook. Maybe it's the night you saw their name light up and felt your stomach drop. Maybe it's the morning you knew it was over but smiled anyway. See yourself there. What were you carrying that day? What were you afraid would happen if you spoke up or if you didn't? You weren't just being needy or dramatic. You were trying to protect something, your place in their life, your sense of being chosen, your hope that love wouldn't leave again. The hardest part is, you judge yourself now from a distance you didn't have then. You forget how tired you were, how lonely the nights had been, how much silence you had already swallowed just to keep the peace. If you look closely, can you notice what that version of you needed in that exact moment? Maybe they needed reassurance that they weren't too much. Maybe they needed a boundary they had never seen modeled. Maybe they just needed rest or someone to say, "You don't have to fix this alone." It's not just about what you should have done differently. It's about what you didn't know you were allowed to need. Research calls it counterfactual thinking when you rewrite the past with if-only scenes. But when you stand inside the real memory instead of the edited one, you start to see a person who was doing the best they could with the tools they had. That doesn't make every choice right. It just means every choice makes sense when you remember the fear underneath it. So try talking to that younger you the way you would to a close friend who messed up while they were in pain. If your friend told you, "I stayed even when it hurt," would you call them pathetic, or would you see how badly they wanted love to work? What scares me most is how easily we offer compassion outward and save the sharpest words for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be accountable, but accountability without tenderness turns into punishment. As long as you haven't learned to speak kindly to the you who actually lived it, you'll keep confusing self-hatred with growth. Loving who you are now doesn't mean erasing what happened or pretending you didn't cross your own lines. It means relating to those memories from a steadier place where you can say, "Yes, that was me. And I understand why I did that. And I'm learning." You start letting the past inform you instead of indict you. And I know there's a part of you that worries. If you stop being cruel to yourself, won't you just repeat everything? In the next part, I want to sit with that fear that self-compassion will make you careless or selfish and show you why it's the opposite. What scares me most about letting myself off the hook? What scares me most is how quickly your brain argues back. The moment you even consider being kinder to yourself, there's this panic. If I stop blaming myself, I'll become selfish. If I forgive myself, I'll hurt someone like this again. It feels safer to stay in the punishment you know than to risk becoming a person you're afraid of. You lie awake at night and think, if I let up on myself, I'll let myself off the hook. You picture people you've known who never apologized, never looked at their part, just moved on like nothing happened. You promised yourself you'd never be like them. So you overcorrect, you turn every mistake into a life sentence. You tell yourself that staying lonely and ashamed is the price you pay for the ways you hurt people. The hardest part is, those fears didn't come from nowhere. Maybe you grew up being shamed instead of guided. Maybe the only time anyone took you seriously was when you were already in trouble. So now, you think the only way to stay good is to stay scared. Or maybe you watched someone cause damage and then hide behind nobody's perfect, while they kept doing the same thing. Of course you don't want to be that. Of course you feel like relaxing the grip, even a little, is dangerous. But it's not just about what you did. It's about what you believe keeps you from doing it again. You've confused self-hatred with accountability, like the more you hurt, the safer everyone else will be. Yet people who drown in shame don't actually repair more. They just feel more wrong, more broken, more convinced they are the problem instead of seeing the problem clearly. Shame makes you hide. Responsibility asks you to stay present. There's research that shows this, but you already feel it. Think of the times you were so busy calling yourself a terrible person that you couldn't even listen to the other person's pain. You were in survival mode, defending or collapsing. That doesn't make you a monster. It just means the way you've been trying to keep yourself in line is actually pulling you away from real repair. Genuine self-forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. You can care deeply about the impact you had without living in self-hatred. You can say, I did hurt them, and instead of, so I'm unlovable, you start asking, what do I need to learn so I don't repeat this? Treating yourself with respect doesn't mean you think you did nothing wrong. It means you believe you're worth the work of changing. As long as you haven't gone numb, as long as you still feel that ache when you remember, there is hope. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do better because you love better, not because you're terrified of yourself. In the next part, I want to show you how self-forgiveness can sit right beside real amends and what it actually looks like to hold yourself accountable without living the rest of your life on trial. Accountable self-forgiveness. Holding the truth without holding the whip. Accountable self-forgiveness starts in that same place. The night, the replay, the scene you swear you could still fix if time would just open a small door. Not with pretending it did not matter, not with telling yourself to move on faster, but with sitting down inside the memory and naming what actually happened. Not the monster version of you, not the perfect version of you. You as you were. The hardest part is letting go of the story where you ruined everything single-handedly. So you start with 4 simple steps. First, this is what I did and what I didn't do. Plain words, no drama. I shut down in that conversation. I lied. I stayed when I should have left. Second, this is how it hurt them, and this is how it hurt me. You let yourself feel the wince in your chest instead of rushing past it. You let the impact land. Third, this was my context, not as an excuse, but as a map. I had never seen a calm argument before. I was terrified of being alone. I thought love meant never saying no. You remember that self-blame is often a way to feel in control after loss. It feels easier to believe, if I had been better, they would have stayed, than to face, it was never fully in my control. What scares me most is how convincing that first story can sound when you are lonely and tired. Fourth, This is how I choose to show up now. This is where accountable self-forgiveness lives. It's not just about feeling sorry, it's about integration. You carry the lesson with you instead of the whip. Next time, I will speak up sooner. Next time, I will walk away from half love. Next time, I will tell the truth even if it risks being left. You're not erasing consequences. You're refusing to live forever in self-exile. When your mind drags you back into, I ruined everything, you can walk through the same structure again. What happened? How it hurt. The context, the choice now. You can even write it down, like a small ritual each night when the silence gets loud. Not because writing fixes the past, but because it keeps you from staying trapped in a permanent emotional courtroom where you are always on trial and never allowed to grow. There's nothing wrong with still feeling the ache. That doesn't make you broken, it just means you cared. As long as you haven't gone numb, you can still choose differently. In the next part, I want to show you how to turn this into real trust with yourself, so that your new choices do not just sound good in theory, they feel safe enough to live. Rebuilding trust with yourself after you feel like you failed. So, how do you actually start trusting yourself again when your own choices feel like the thing that hurt you most? How do you not freeze the next time love stands in front of you, terrified you're about to repeat the same story? The quiet fear underneath all of this is simple. What if I can't trust myself not to mess it up next time? Not just, what if they leave, but what if I hand them the knife again? What scares me most is how reasonable that fear sounds when you're alone at night, replaying the same scene, convinced one different sentence, one different boundary could have saved everything. But self-trust isn't about promising you will never say the wrong thing or choose the wrong person. That's not trust, that's perfectionism in disguise. The hardest part is accepting that you will make mistakes again. You will misread someone. You will ignore a red flag once in a while because you really want it to be love. Self-trust is believing that when that happens, you will listen sooner, repair what you can, and protect yourself where you couldn't before. It's not just about predicting the future correctly. It's about how you treat yourself when you don't. Do you turn on yourself and declare you're unfit for love? Or do you sit in the silence and say, I see why you tried that. It made sense with what you knew then. We'll do it differently next time. You start small because your nervous system doesn't believe big promises right now. You rebuild trust the same way you would with someone who hurt you. Slowly, consistently, without grand speeches. You keep tiny promises to yourself. If you say you'll leave the party at 10 because you feel drained, you leave at 10. If you feel a knot in your stomach when someone jokes about your feelings, you don't laugh it off. You notice it. You do not have to confront them right away. It just means you stop calling that feeling overreacting. There's nothing wrong with practicing on the smallest things. Choosing the meal you actually want instead of the one you think you should order. Admitting, I'm tired, I want to go home. Even if you worry it makes you difficult. That doesn't make you selfish, it just means you're learning to believe your own body again. Every time you honor a tiny preference, you're telling yourself, I hear you, you matter. As long as you haven't gone numb, you can also practice with red flags. The text that makes you feel strangely lonely right after reading it. The way their words about commitment never quite match their actions. You do not have to leave immediately. You just stop arguing with the part of you that feels off. You write it down. You say it out loud to a friend. You let reality speak before hope edits it. Slowly, self-trust turns into a different kind of hope about love. Not the fantasy that you'll be perfect and therefore safe, but the quiet confidence that even if you choose someone and it doesn't last, you won't abandon yourself in the process. Future love does not need you flawless. It needs you present, honest, and willing to course correct. And the more you learn to stay on your own side, the more your heart starts to believe that the next person you choose will have to meet you there too. In the next part, I want to talk about that. what it actually looks like to let yourself be loved without performing, without shrinking, without paying for the past every time someone new tries to hold you. It's not just about what you did, it's about who you're becoming. Now let's zoom out for a second, because if you stay too close to the moment things fell apart, it starts to feel like your whole life is just that one scene on repeat, that one night, that one sentence, that one choice you keep circling back to, convinced that if you'd done it differently, you'd be loved by them right now. But it's not just about what you did, it's about who you're becoming in the aftermath. You didn't just go through a breakup or a rejection or a slow fade. You went through something that changed you, and now you're quietly deciding what that change is going to mean. Does it mean, I ruined everything, I'm unlovable? Or does it mean, I'm someone who can be shattered and still choose to grow more gentle, more honest, more awake? The hardest part is, your brain keeps offering you the first story. It replays the argument, the unanswered message, the moment you pulled away or held on too tight. Psychologists call it rewriting the past with if-only scenes, but to you it just feels like lying awake at night, whispering, if I hadn't said that, if I'd been calmer, if I'd loved them better. You think you're just overthinking, but most of the time, this is grief in disguise. What scares me most is how easily self-blame can start to feel like identity. You stop saying, I made mistakes, and you start saying, I am the mistake. But that doesn't make you accurate. It just means you're used to holding yourself responsible for everything that went wrong, because it's less terrifying than admitting some things were never in your control. They had their patterns, their wounds, their limits. You didn't create all of that alone. If you look closely, there are qualities already growing out of this hurt. You're more empathetic now. You notice the quiet shifts in people's tone, because you know what it's like to be silently pulling away. You're more aware. You see red flags you used to explain away. You're learning boundaries, not because you're cold, but because you finally understand that love without self-respect just empties you. You're practicing the courage to look at yourself honestly, without turning that honesty into a weapon. Your worth is not frozen in the moment things fell apart. It's being shaped right now. And how you respond, how you learn, how you choose to love going forward. As long as you haven't gone numb, as long as you still feel that ache and still reach for something kinder, you are not stuck as the person you were in your worst scene. You start becoming someone new every time you choose reflection over self-punishment. There's nothing wrong with the part of you that still hopes to be chosen. That longing is the same part of you that sits here, listening, trying to understand yourself instead of running away. This slow, reflective, sometimes painful looking inward, this is evidence, proof that you are, and always were, someone capable of deep love. And the next part, I want to stay with that, what it means to let this new version of you walk into future love without dragging the old verdicts along, and how to recognize when someone is actually safe enough to meet the person you're becoming. You are not the villain of this story. You keep going back to the same scene, don't you? The same night, the same sentence, the same moment you're sure you could have loved better, softer, wiser. In the silence, it starts to feel simple. If you were different, they would have stayed. If you were better, you wouldn't be alone. The hardest part is, your mind is wired to look for a clear villain when something breaks. It wants one clean cause, one person to blame, because that feels safer than admitting love can end for reasons you can't control. And because you know your own flaws the best, you start choosing yourself as the villain. You pick apart every word you said, every need you had, every time you were tired or distant, as if one perfect version of you could have saved it. But that story you tell yourself at night, it's not just about honesty, it's about control. If it was all your fault, then it means you could have prevented the hurt. It means next time, if you just fix enough, you can guarantee being chosen. What scares me most is how convincing that sounds when you already feel unworthy. The truth is quieter and less dramatic. Relationships don't end because of one message you sent too late or one argument you didn't handle perfectly. They end for layered, intersecting reasons. Two histories, two nervous systems, two sets of fears and limits and expectations that did or didn't fit. Their confusion, their avoidance, their silence, their own unfinished wounds were in the room too. They had agency, they made choices. That doesn't make them evil. It just means they weren't a passive background to your mistakes. You remember the night you raised your voice, but not the months you tried to talk gently. You replay the day you pulled away, but forget the nights you stayed up listening when you were exhausted. The brain clings to what feels wrong, to the sharp edges. It edits the past into a cleaner tragedy where you are the problem, instead of two people who couldn't meet each other fully. So I want you to try something simple. Write the story twice. First, the way you already do in your head. Every failure, every flaw, every moment you think proves you're unlovable. Let it all pour out. Then, write it again as if you're describing a stranger to someone you care about. Same events, same nights, same silence. Would you still say they ruined everything? Or would you see a human who tried, who got scared, who didn't know better yet? There's nothing wrong with seeing where you want to grow. Accountability is love. But tearing yourself apart is not the same as taking responsibility. As long as you haven't confused punishment with growth, there's still room to tell a truer story about what happened and about who you are now, walking toward a different kind of love. When blaming yourself feels safer than admitting you had no control, but what if the story you've been telling isn't just harsh, it's also comforting in a strange way? Do you ever notice how saying, "It was all my fault," almost soothes something inside you, even as it hurts? Because if it was all your fault, then it means it was preventable. It means there was a version of you, with better timing, better words, fewer needs, who could have saved it. You start believing there was a secret combination that would have kept you from being alone tonight. The hardest part is admitting there might not have been. That maybe you could have said every perfect sentence, never raised your voice, never cried in the wrong moment, and they still might have left. It's not just about losing a person. It's losing the illusion that love is a puzzle you can solve if you just work hard enough on yourself. What scares me most, and maybe you too, is the possibility that people can walk away for reasons that have nothing to do with you. That someone can change, shut down, or hurt you because of their own wounds, their own fear, their own story you were never going to rewrite. Powerlessness is a cold feeling. Blaming yourself, at least, feels warm. Familiar. Like, if I broke it, I can fix it. So you lie awake at night replaying that one argument, that one unanswered message, that one day you were distant, convinced that a different move would have saved the whole future. Psychologists call it counterfactual thinking, but for you it's just, if only I had, on repeat. This is survivor's guilt in relationships. You're the one left standing in the silence, so you decide you must be the one who failed the test. You didn't just lose them. You lost the future where you imagined you were better, and they stayed. You feel responsible not only for the breakup, but for not rescuing their sadness, their loneliness, their self-destructive patterns, as if love means you should have saved them from themselves. That doesn't make you foolish. It just means you cared more than your power could reach. There's nothing wrong with wanting to grow from what happened, but there's a difference between learning and kneeling in front of a past you cannot change, begging it to open a different door. Releasing self-blame is not you saying, "I did everything right." It's you saying, "I never had the power to control another person's heart, only my own." If control was an illusion, then what does real responsibility look like now, in the life and love you still have? Accountability without self-cruelty. Learning a new kind of honesty. Real responsibility looks like this. You sit in the quiet, maybe that same night where the room feels too big, and instead of asking, "How did I ruin everything?" you ask, "What actually happened to me, and because of me?" It's a softer question, but it's also braver. It lets you see your impact without deciding you are the hurt you caused. Healthy accountability is not you putting yourself on trial and never letting yourself step down from the stand. It's you being willing to see clearly. Here's where I shut down. Here's where I clung too tightly. Here's where I ignored my own needs and then exploded. It's not just about what you did wrong. It's also about what shaped you, what you didn't know yet, what you were afraid of losing. You start to see the whole picture, not just the ugliest frame. The hardest part is, your brain thinks punishment is the same as responsibility. So you replay that one conversation again and again, convinced that if you had said one different sentence, love would have stayed. You lie awake at night, going over every pause in their voice, every look on their face, as if the right analysis could rewind time. But nothing new arrives, just new angles of the same old shame. That's not accountability. That's destructive rumination. It's the loop where the only real question underneath is, how can I prove I was the problem? Not because you like hurting yourself, but because if you were the problem, then maybe you could have fixed it. What scares me most is how safe that can feel. Blaming yourself feels easier than accepting that some things end even when you tried, even when you loved. Healthy accountability asks a different question. What can I learn, and how can I show up differently next time? It doesn't erase your impact. If you lied, if you withdrew, if you stayed where you were being slowly unchosen, you name that, clearly, honestly. But you don't stop there and build a house in the guilt. You ask, what was in my control, and what never actually was? As long as you haven't answered that, you'll keep punishing yourself for other people's choices. So here's something small and real you can do. Think of one specific regret, not your whole love life, just one moment that still stings. Maybe the night you yelled, maybe the day you stayed silent, maybe the time you went back when your body already knew it would hurt. Gently write or whisper 3 things. First, this is what I did and what I wish I had done instead. Second, this is what is still in my control now. An apology, a boundary, a different pattern with the next person, a promise to yourself. Third, this is what is no longer in my control. Their response, their healing, their decision to stay or go. And then, just for tonight, let the third part go. Not because it doesn't matter, because it's not yours. That doesn't make you careless. It just means you are learning to carry only what belongs to you. So you have hands free to hold the person you are becoming next. Grieving the version of you that might have saved everything. And this is where another weight shows up. Not just the weight of what you lost, but the weight of who you think you should have been. The version of you who could have kept them. The one who never froze, never snapped, never shut down. You know the one I mean, right? The you who was always patient, always secure, always soft at the exact right moments. The you who never sent the reactive text, never raised their voice, never pulled away when you felt lonely or scared. In your head, that version of you heard every unspoken need, stayed calm in every fight, and loved them so perfectly that leaving would have felt impossible. The hardest part is how real that person feels at night. You replay one conversation and think, if I had just stayed quiet there. You go back to one argument and whisper, if I had just hugged them instead of defending myself. It starts to sound logical. If you had been more loving, more secure, more better, they would still be here. Being alone doesn't hurt the most. Being convinced you ruined your own chance at love does. But this fantasy self, they were built with perfect hindsight. They get to know exactly which words would have calmed them, which boundary would have saved the relationship, which wound you were touching without realizing. They don't have your history. They don't carry your old hurt, your attachment fears, your loneliness, your confusion. They move through every moment as if they weren't scared, as if they hadn't been disappointed before. That doesn't make you careless, it just means you were human, trying to love with the tools you had then. What scares me most is how easily self-blame can feel like responsibility. If it was all your fault, then it was all in your control. You start believing that if you can just hate yourself enough, you'll make sure you never make those mistakes again. But it's not just about accountability. It's punishment dressed up as growth. Studies call it counterfactual thinking, but you know it as the endless if-only loop that keeps you awake in the silence. So I want to try something with you. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture that imagined self standing in front of you. Notice how calm they look, how chosen they seem, how nothing ever goes wrong for them. Let yourself feel the ache of wanting to be them. Then, gently walk closer. Tell them, "Thank you for showing me what I value. Thank you for holding my hope for a different ending." Notice how they soften when you say that. Because they were never here to shame you. They were here to show you the kind of love you long for. Now imagine placing a hand on their shoulder and saying, "But you are not me." And you never were. Feel the grief of that. You are mourning a person who only existed in your mind. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a kind of loss, too. As long as you haven't gone numb, you can still let them go. Watch them step back, not as punishment, but as release. As they fade, there's an empty space where they stood. It might feel terrifying at first, like standing alone in a quiet room after the noise stops. But that space isn't a failure, it's an opening. Because the next part of this is not about becoming that impossible version of you. It's about finally turning toward the person who's actually here, waiting under all the blame. And meeting them might change everything. Meeting the you who survived, loving who you are now. So, before you disappear back into the past again, can we pause here in this quiet room and actually look at who's standing in that opening now? Not the version of you that never made a mistake, not the fantasy you who always said the right thing. The real you, the one who woke up today with a heavy chest and still got out of bed. You might not call that surviving. You might think, "I'm just existing. What's the point?" But notice the small, stubborn ways you keep going. You drag yourself to work when you feel alone. You answer a message when you would rather disappear. You sit in the night and press play on something like this instead of numbing out completely. That doesn't make you weak. It just means some part of you still believes there is something on the other side of this hurt. We spend so much time staring at the self we wish we had been, that we forget to meet the self who actually carried us here. The hardest part is admitting that the person you are now is not the failure of the relationship. You are the one holding the weight of the ending. You are the one who walked away or was left and is still choosing in 100 quiet ways not to give up on love or on yourself. When you look at yourself now, what do you see first? The scars? The moments you snapped? The nights you begged them to stay even when you knew it felt wrong? Those are real. They matter. But they can coexist with the way you still reach for kindness, the way you still feel deeply instead of going numb, the way you still have the courage to imagine being chosen for real someday. It's not just about what you did wrong, it's also about what you kept alive. What scares me most is how easily we call our survival shame. You think, if I really had any self-respect, I wouldn't have stayed that long. If I really had any strength, I wouldn't still miss them at night. But there's nothing wrong with having stayed for love you hoped could grow. There's nothing wrong with missing what hurt you. That doesn't mean you want the hurt back. It just means your heart remembers the good parts too. So, right now, gently, could you try something with me? Either write it down or whisper it into the silence, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. 3 sentences that start with, I'm proud of myself for getting through days I thought would break me. I'm proud of myself for still wanting real love after feeling so lonely. I'm proud of myself for sitting here, listening, instead of running from how I feel. As long as you haven't stopped seeing even one small thing to be proud of, your story isn't over. You start to rewrite it exactly here with the way you talk to the you who survived. Rewriting the story from I ruined it to I lived through it. So now we're here at this quiet place where you start talking to yourself differently, where the story in your head matters just as much as the story that actually happened. Because the hardest part is your nervous system can't tell the difference between a memory and a movie you replay every night. The words you choose become the script your body rehearses in the dark. Every time you say, I ruined it, I ruined everything, your chest tightens like it's happening again. Your heart hears a verdict, not a sentence. It doesn't know you're just trying to understand what went wrong. It just hears, I'm the problem. I'm the reason I'm alone. And when that line gets repeated enough, it stops feeling like a thought and starts feeling like the truth. What scares me most is how believable that voice can sound when you're lonely. When the silence after them feels louder than anything they ever said. When you lie awake at night, replaying one argument, one moment you pulled away, one message you didn't send. You imagine a perfect version of you who would have known exactly what to do, and you punish the version who didn't. But what if you soften just one phrase? Not, I ruined everything, but I made mistakes in something that mattered to me. Feel how different that lands in your body. One sentence says, you are wrong. The other says you are human. It's not just about language, it's about whether you leave any room for growth or only room for shame. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be accountable. Owning your part is a form of love, but there's a line where accountability ends and self-cruelty begins. You can say, I shut down when I was scared, without adding, so I don't deserve to be chosen. You can say, I hurt them sometimes, without deciding, that means I'll always hurt everyone. That doesn't make you careless. It just means you're finally telling the whole story. Try this. Write a short, honest summary of that relationship. Not a confession, not a fantasy. A summary. Include the ways you avoided hard talks, the times you clung too tight, the nights you ignored red flags. But also include the meals you cooked, the patience you offered, the context you were carrying, the wounds you hadn't learned how to name yet. Put your effort and your fear on the same page. Then, underneath it, write, I didn't fail at love. I experienced love, I learned from love, and I am still capable of love. Read it slowly, out loud if you can. As long as you haven't given up on that sentence, your nervous system has something new to practice. Because how you speak to yourself about this past love will quietly decide which kind of love you'll allow in next. If your story is only, I ruin everything, you'll keep accepting whatever proves you right. But if your story becomes, I lived through it, I learned, I'm still capable, what kind of love might you finally believe you deserve? What this teaches you about how you want to love next time. So, from here, instead of asking, how did I ruin it? I want to ask you something softer. What do you want to try differently next time? Not as a punishment, not as proof that you were the one who was wrong all along. As a quiet promise to your future self and to the person who will one day be sitting across from you in the soft light of another night, choosing you. You don't have to rewrite your whole personality. You don't have to fix every flaw before you're allowed to love again. You start by naming one or two patterns that hurt you the most. Maybe it's how quickly you apologize for things that weren't your fault. Maybe it's how you shut down in silence every time you felt scared. What if, instead of, I'll never do that again, your intention became, next time, I want to notice when I disappear. Or, next time, I want to say when I'm hurt, even if my voice shakes. The hardest part is, we think we need these dramatic vows to keep us safe. I'll never get attached again. I'll never let anyone see me cry. I'll never mess up like that. It sounds strong, but it's just another cage. It's not just about never repeating the past. It's about slowly learning new ways to stay present when your chest tightens and your old fear wakes up. A gentler intention sounds more like, when I feel that panic, I want to pause before I react. Or, I want to ask a question instead of assuming the worst. Think about what scares you most to repeat. Is it begging for crumbs of love? Is it ignoring every red flag because you were lonely? Is it exploding in anger because you were really just afraid of being left alone again? What scares me most, personally, is going quiet about my needs until resentment is the only thing left. That fear can become a guidepost. The very thing you're most afraid of doing again can show you exactly what to practice in small, ordinary moments with the next person who holds your hand. Psychologists call it learning, but it doesn't feel clinical when it's your heart. It feels like sitting with yourself after the hurt and saying, okay, that didn't go how I hoped. What did it teach me about the kind of love I want to build? There's nothing wrong with realizing you want more consistency, more honesty, more calm. That doesn't make you demanding. It just means you finally believe your needs are real. And you are not broken for needing practice. You're in progress. As long as you haven't gone numb, you are still building emotional muscles you never knew the names of. You're learning how to stay, how to leave, how to speak, how to listen. This is how you become someone who can hold the kind of steady, mutual love you've always imagined, without needing to be perfect first. Because the next part is letting yourself believe you still deserve that kind of love, even with all your imperfections. How do you let that in without waiting to become someone else first? You don't have to earn the right to be loved. You've probably been carrying this quiet contract for years. Once I fix everything about myself, once I stop overthinking, stop being afraid, stop messing up, then I'll deserve someone who stays. Then I'll be safe to love. Then I won't hurt anyone and no one will leave. Does that feel familiar when the night goes quiet and the old scenes start replaying? You lie there in the silence, going over the same conversation again, convinced that one different sentence could have saved everything. If you hadn't raised your voice, if you had answered that message sooner, if you had been less needy or more open, or somehow perfectly balanced between the two. The hardest part is your brain makes those if-only versions feel more real than what actually happened. Psychologists call it counterfactual thinking, but to you it just feels like proof you were the problem. You start believing love is a test you failed, and the grade you got means you're not ready, not worthy, not enough. But love is not a reward for perfection. It's not a prize handed out only to people who never get triggered, never shut down, never say the wrong thing. It's a connection between two imperfect people who are willing to show up, repair, and grow. You didn't lose them because you weren't flawless. You lost a relationship that was shaped by two nervous systems, two histories, two sets of fears. What scares me most is how quickly we erase the other person's part and keep only our own mistakes, as if taking all the blame could somehow give us back control. It just means you're human, and you wanted so badly to make it work that you'd rather be the villain than accept it was never fully in your hands. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be better. Growth is beautiful. Accountability matters. But there's a line where honest reflection turns into quiet self-cruelty. Where I could have handled that differently becomes, I don't deserve to be loved until I never do that again. That doesn't make you responsible. That just makes you lonely inside your own life. So let me say this plainly. Your mistakes do not disqualify you from being chosen and cherished. Your fears do not cancel your right to love. Your healing process, with all its relapses and repeats, does not put you on some cosmic waiting list until you're finally fixed. As long as you haven't given up on learning, you're already enough to sit across from someone who wants to stay. Try this with me for a moment. Breathe and quietly repeat, I am not a project. I am a person. I don't have to earn the right to be loved. It's not just about being good enough. It's about being real, honest, and willing. Someone can love me and my healing, not just my highlight reel. I am allowed to be chosen, even while I'm still becoming. What would it feel like if someone saw you exactly as you are right now and loved you there without waiting for you to become someone else first? Imagining a love that stays when you're not perfect. Close your eyes for a moment, if you can. Imagine you're sitting on a couch in a quiet room at night. There's a soft lamp on, the kind that makes the walls feel closer, safer. Outside, it's dark and the world is busy forgetting you exist. But in here, there's just you. And someone who chose to be here with you. You're not dressed up. You didn't rehearse what to say. Your hair is how it actually looks at the end of a long day. Your phone is face down on the table, and the silence between you isn't heavy. It's gentle. They're not scrolling. They're not half listening. They're just here, knees turned toward you. Eyes soft, like they're not looking for the best version of you. Just the real one. You start to talk, but not the polished version you usually give. You tell the messy truth. The way you replay old conversations at 2 a.m. The way you lie awake and think, if I had just said this instead, maybe they wouldn't have left. You tell them the hardest part is how you always feel wrong. Like love is a test you keep failing without knowing the questions. They don't interrupt to fix you. They don't rush to say, don't think like that. They just nod, slow, like every word you say is allowed. Like there's nothing wrong with the way your mind loops and worries and aches. Their hand is resting near yours on the couch, not grabbing, not pulling, just there, an open invitation you can accept or ignore. In this scene, you don't have to perform. You don't have to over-explain why you're still hurt. You don't have to apologize for not being over it yet. You don't have to keep proving you're worth staying for. You can just breathe. You can let the silence stretch and not panic that they'll get bored and leave. You look down, pick at your sleeve, and finally say the sentence you always swallow. I'm scared I'll mess this up. I'm scared I'll hurt you. I'm scared I'm too much and not enough at the same time. Your voice shakes a little because what scares me most is saying the truth and watching someone walk away. But in this room, they don't move away. They lean a little closer. They say, I'm scared too, but we'll figure it out together. Not, I'll fix you. Not, you better not mess up. Just together. It's not just about never making mistakes. It's about not having to face them alone. Feel how your shoulders drop, how your chest loosens. Feel what it's like when love doesn't flinch at your fear. That doesn't make you weak. It just means your nervous system is finally tasting what safety feels like. And I know part of you is thinking, this is just a fantasy. But what if it isn't? What if this is a rehearsal, not an escape? As long as you haven't gone numb, as long as you still hope for this kind of calm, you're already becoming someone who can receive it. Maybe love like this isn't here yet. Maybe it left. Maybe it's still on its way. But sitting in this imagined room, you're teaching your heart a new story. That you don't have to be perfect to be chosen. And that some people won't run when you're honest about the ways you're afraid. Hold that feeling for a moment longer. Because next, I want to ask you something harder. What do you do with all the nights when you don't have this? When the questions stay unanswered and the room is actually empty? Learning to live with the questions. You can't answer, those are the nights when the room feels too big and your thoughts feel even bigger. You lie there in the silence, staring at the ceiling, and the question creeps in again. What could I have done differently? One text sooner, one boundary later, one softer tone in that last argument. Your mind starts building whole alternate timelines in the dark. This is where it gets cruel because it's not just about missing them. It's about all the questions you can't seem to answer. Did they ever really love you, or were you just convenient? Were they already halfway gone while you were planning a future? Are they happier now, relieved to be free of you, or secretly regretting it at night too? The hardest part is, some of those questions will never have clear answers, and your brain hates that. Psychologists have a name for this, but you don't need the term to know how it feels. You replay the same conversation 100 times, convinced one different sentence could have saved everything. You zoom in on tiny moments like they're evidence in a trial. You decide if you can find the exact place you went wrong, you can stop feeling so out of control. What scares me most is how easy it is to confuse self-blame with self-awareness. The hardest part is often not the breakup itself. It's the unfinished story. Your mind keeps trying to write the missing chapters. What they were thinking, what they're thinking now. What would have happened if you had been better? You didn't just lose a person, you lost the version of your life where they stayed, and the version of you who never made those mistakes. You're grieving someone you never got to be. So what do you do with questions that won't sit still, but also won't be solved? I picture a shelf in my mind, not a trash can, not a locked box. A simple shelf. When a question comes up that I can't honestly answer, did they ever really care? Would it have worked if I'd tried harder? I name it, and I put it there. I don't pretend it doesn't matter. I just admit, I don't know yet, and maybe I never will. There's nothing wrong with you if those questions still pull you back sometimes. That doesn't make you weak or obsessed. It just means you loved, and your brain is still trying to protect you by finding a pattern. As long as you haven't gone completely numb, you'll feel the tug. But you start visiting the shelf less often. Life grows around it. New memories, new nights, new moments where the ache isn't the loudest thing in the room. When one of those painful questions shows up, try this. Pause and quietly name it. This is the thought that I ruined everything. Notice how it makes your chest feel, your throat, your stomach. Take one slow breath in and one slow breath out. Then, very gently ask yourself, what is one small thing I can do in this moment that is real? Not to solve the past, just to be here. Maybe it's drinking some water, touching the wall beside your bed, texting a friend, stepping outside for 1 minute of air. It won't erase the question. But every time you choose a small, present action over another hour of mental trials, you're teaching your nervous system that the past doesn't get to own the whole night. And when the questions quiet down, even for a few seconds, there's a tiny bit of space. Space where something else can appear. A softer thought. A new desire. A different kind of hope. That space is where the next part of your healing waits. And it's where we're going next. What is still here? Returning to the life in front of you. That space you just made, even if it's only the length of a breath, is where you start to notice what's still here. Not in your memories, not in the versions of the story you rewrite at night. Here, in this exact moment. The light in the room, the sound in the background, the way the air feels on your skin. If you look up for a second, what do you see? Maybe it's the soft glow of a lamp, or the harsh blue of a screen, or the way the shadows pool in the corners. Maybe you hear a car passing outside, a fridge humming, the small, steady noises that only appear when everything else goes quiet. None of that fixes the hurt, but it reminds you. You are not only living in your head. There is a world touching you, even in the silence. Run your fingers over something near you. A blanket, the edge of the table, your own wrist. Notice the texture, the temperature, the weight of your body where it meets the chair or the bed. Being alone in a room doesn't mean you're only your thoughts. You are breath and warmth and heartbeat. You are more than the scene that keeps replaying. The hardest part is accepting that one version of the future really is gone. The one where that person stayed. The one where that relationship magically healed because you said the perfect thing. That future felt so real that losing it can feel like a death. You didn't just lose a person, you lost the life you thought you were building with them. No wonder you feel so wrong. But that ending didn't erase every other future. It just means the path you were gripping closed, and 100 quieter paths are now waiting where you're not looking. What scares me most is how easy it is to believe the story that says, I ruined my only chance. That doesn't make you dramatic. It just means you're grieving. Grief loves to tell you that nothing good is coming next. Grief is loud. New possibilities are shy. So instead of asking, how do I fix everything I broke? Try a smaller question. What is one act of care I can offer myself today? Not to prove you're over it. Not to rush yourself into moving on. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water on purpose. Maybe it's stepping outside for 5 minutes and feeling the air. Maybe it's texting one safe person, I'm having a hard night. There's nothing wrong with starting that small. As long as you haven't given up on treating yourself like someone worth caring for, love hasn't left you. It's not just about moving on from them, it's about moving with yourself, with what you've learned, with the softer parts you used to hide to be chosen. You carry all of that into whatever comes next, and in the next part, we're going to talk about how to walk forward without abandoning the you that survived this. What you're taking with you. A gentle recap of your healing. You carry all of that into whatever comes next, and if you listen closely, you can already feel it, can't you? The way this whole story of what I could have done differently has slowly been turning into, how can I treat myself differently now? It's quiet, but it's there. We've walked through the illusion of the perfect past, the way your mind rewrites scenes at night, polishing old moments until they look flawless except for you. Not because you're dramatic, but because being lonely with your thoughts makes every memory louder. You start thinking, if I had just said this one sentence, if I had just been less needy, less soft, less me, maybe they would have stayed. The hardest part is how real that feels, even when it isn't true. We name the pull of self-blame, how it can feel safer to believe you ruined it than to accept that love was never fully in your control. That doesn't make you broken, it just means you were trying to find order inside chaos. You wanted a reason so the hurt wouldn't feel so random. There's nothing wrong with wanting to understand what went wrong. But we also talked about how understanding is different from endlessly punishing yourself. Accountability is, here's what I did, here's what I'd like to do differently next time. Rumination is, here's what I did, so I deserve to suffer forever. One opens a door, the other locks you in a room with the same scene on repeat. Do you feel the difference in your body when you hear that? One has air in it, the other has only silence and shame. Somewhere in this, you've done something brave. You let yourself revisit painful memories without letting them define you as the villain. You questioned the harsh voice that told you it was all your fault. You considered that maybe both things can be true. You made mistakes, and you were also doing the best you could with what you knew then. What scares me most is how rarely we say that to ourselves. Maybe you've noticed small shifts. A little more softness when you remember that last argument. A little more understanding when you think about the version of you who begged, or stayed too long, or walked away too late. A little more room to be imperfect without deciding you're unlovable. It's not just about seeing them differently, it's about seeing you differently. If all you've gained so far is a tiny pause between the thought, I ruined everything, and the belief that it's absolute truth, that's a movement. If you've started asking, what would I say to a friend who went through this? You've already begun practicing self-compassion. You start realizing that the standards you hold yourself to are not the standards you'd ever demand from someone you love. Healing, like we said, isn't one big moment where the past finally lets you go. It's a series of small choices to close the replay at 2 a.m., to answer yourself with kindness instead of cruelty, to admit, I was human instead of, I was a disaster. As long as you haven't given up on treating yourself with a little more care than before, you are already in the middle of your healing, not at the beginning of it. And from here, we're going to talk about what it looks like to carry this softer way of seeing yourself into the next chapter of love, so you don't have to abandon the you that's learning to stay. Your next small step a call to keep choosing yourself. So before we move into that next chapter, I want to bring it back to something small. Not the whole future, not the whole story. Just the next 24 hours. Because the hardest part is, if you only think in lifetimes and forever, you stay stuck in the same night, replaying the same scene, asking the same, what could I have done differently? Until the silence feels louder than your own voice. So, within the next day, I want you to choose one thing that is just for you. One concrete action that leans towards self-compassion instead of self-punishment. Maybe it's 10 honest minutes of journaling, where you write the unedited version of what still hurts without trying to fix it. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend and saying, "Can I tell you something I'm still carrying?" Maybe it's letting yourself rest without earning it, taking a nap, turning your phone off for an hour. Maybe it's quietly setting a boundary, saying no to a conversation, a favor, or a person that keeps reopening the same wound. It's not just about the action itself, it's about proving to your nervous system that you're on your own side now. That you can feel lonely without abandoning yourself. That you can be hurt without deciding you're the one who is wrong. You start teaching your body that safety is not only found in being chosen by someone else, but in how you choose yourself when no one is watching. And when that loop comes back, because it will, I want you to have a plan. Save this. Bookmark it. Download it. Write down the lines that made you exhale. Come back to this on the nights when your brain is trying to rewrite the past like a movie you should have directed better. Let this be proof that you're not the only one lying awake, wondering if one different sentence could have saved everything. As long as you haven't given up on reaching for kinder words, you are not alone in this. You don't have to keep all of this inside either. There's nothing wrong with needing another human to help you hold what feels too heavy. Share your reflections with a trusted friend, a therapist, or even in a private note you'll never send. Saying, "I still blame myself for this," out loud turns isolated pain into something that can be met, understood, answered. That doesn't make you weak. Just means you're letting love in through a different door. What scares me most, and maybe you too, is that secret fear that this is it. That you'll never be loved again. Never forgive yourself. Never feel light about this story. But this fear is not the ending. It is only a chapter, a night scene in a much longer book. You are already moving through it, word by word, choice by choice. In the next part, we'll talk about how to keep walking forward without leaving yourself behind, so love doesn't have to cost you anymore. You are still worth loving, even here. So here you are, in this part of the story. The night is quiet again, the questions are loud again, and you keep circling back to the same fear. Did this ending prove that you are unlovable? That this mistake, this breakup, this version of you at your worst somehow canceled your chance at being truly chosen? I wish you could see yourself from the outside for a moment. Not in the harsh light you use on yourself, but the way a kind stranger on a train might notice you. Tired, maybe, a little haunted, but still soft around the eyes. The hardest part is you think the hurt you caused, or the ways you stayed too long, are the only things anyone will ever see. But that doesn't make it true. It's not just about what happened between you and them. It's about the story you built on top of it. The late night edits where you rewrite the past and give yourself all the blame, as if one different sentence, one different reaction, could have saved everything. What scares me most is how quickly you turn every memory into evidence that you were the problem, instead of evidence that you were trying, with the tools you had, in a love that was never only yours to control. So let me say this plainly, because you deserve to hear it in clear, simple language. Nothing you did or didn't do has the power to erase your worth. You are not a canceled person. You are not a failed experiment in love. You are a human who got attached, who got scared, who made choices in the middle of confusion and longing. There's nothing wrong with wanting so badly to be loved that you lost your balance. It just means you cared more than your nervous system knew how to handle. Healing from that will not be clean. Some mornings you'll feel light, almost free. Some nights the silence will bring every old question back, and you'll wonder, am I going backwards? You're not. Grief moves in circles, not straight lines. As long as you haven't given up on listening to yourself a little more gently than before, you are still moving. So when the spiral starts, when you start calling yourself the villain again, pause. Remember this, you are not the villain. You are not beyond repair. You are not stuck in this version of the story forever. You are allowed to hope for a love that meets you where you are now, not where you think you should have been. A love that doesn't punish you for learning slowly. A love that doesn't need you to be perfect to stay. A love that feels like someone sitting beside you in the dark, not fixing the night, just holding your hand through it. Until that love arrives, you are allowed to be that person for yourself. To sit with your own hurt without turning it into a verdict. To let today be one small, imperfect step away from self-blame and toward self-respect. This is not the end of your story. This is the chapter where you decide, I am still worth loving, even here, especially here.